Morning's meeting of Mayor's Question Time. The chair is delayed by London Transport. Can I have apologies for absence, please?
We have apologies, Chairman, from Assemblymember Copley, Assemblymember Eshalami MP and Assemblymember Russell.
Thank you very much. Could I welcome to the public gallery home education students and their families visiting with educational events. I don't know if they're here. They're not here. Well, they must be on the same bus as the chairman. May I provide an update on recent Assembly activity? Last week, the Budget and Performance Committee questioned the Mayor, TfL and Old Oak and Park-Royal Development Corporation on the 2020-21 proposed budgets. Today, the Budget and Performance Committee published its response to the Mayor's draft consultation budget 2020-21, which highlights the areas on which the committee would like the Mayor to provide further clarity. The Health Committee published a report on the scale of adverse childhood experiences in London and called on the Mayor and the London Health Board to create an action plan. Sure that the Assembly would like to join me in congratulating all Londoners and GLA family colleagues who received awards in the New Year's Honours List. In particular, I'd like to congratulate former Assembly members Dame Diana Ruth Johnson MP and Sir Bob Neal MP, as well as the emergency services workers who received honours as a result of their commitment to keeping us safe. Finally, I'd like to congratulate Andy Rowe on his appointment as the new London Fire Commissioner at the beginning of this month. And I'd like to congratulate my colleague Assemblymember Boff for his election as Deputy Leader of GLA Conservatives. What power you have. Extreme. Can I ask the Assembly please to note the recommendation set out in item 2 in relation to interests? Thank you very much. Does any Assembly member have any other disclosable pecuniary interest or other relevant interests where they relate to the items on today's agenda? No? Good stuff. Would you now please agree the minutes of the Mayor's Question Time meeting held on the 19th of December to be signed as a correct record? Cool. Would you please formally receive the Mayor's report covering the period from the 6th of December 2019 to the 2nd of January 2020? Thank you. And the Mayor will now provide an oral update of up to 5 minutes in length on matters occurring, what's occurring, since the publication of his report. Mr. Mayor.
Good morning. I'm today calling on the Prime Minister to do all he can to help secure the immediate release of Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe and to meet with her husband Richard Ratcliffe as a matter of urgency. Nazanin is a Londoner and London stands in solidarity with her. She suffered more than 3 years after being wrongly imprisoned in Iran and was recently admitted to a clinic due to ill health. With rising political tensions in Iran, there's simply no time to waste. The Prime Minister needs to step up, right this wrong, and ensure that Nazanin and other British prisoners being wrongly held in Iran are able to return home safely and be reunited with their families. Chair, we're also announcing today that City Hall will be awarding a further £60,000 in funding to community groups providing vital help and information to European Londoners about staying in the UK after Brexit. The UK might be leaving the EU, but will always be part of Europe. And it's now more important than ever that we get the message out there that EU citizens living in our city belong here and will always be welcome in London. Our micro grants have already helped community groups engage thousands of marginalised European Londoners, and I'm delighted that we're able to reach out many more with this round of funding. Since the last Mayor's Question Time, I've also been working on a number of other initiatives to improve the lives of Londoners. This includes continuing to get more social and council homes built, ensuring our transport system remains affordable for all, cleaning up our toxic air, and continuing to do everything possible to tackle violent crime, not only by cracking down on criminals, but by tackling the root causes of violent crime. I look forward to answering Chair questions from the Assembly this morning.
Yes, thank you. Sorry?
Straight to item 5.
Yes, can we go now straight to item 5? Can I see any questions to the Mayor? Assembly Member Boff.
Mr Mayor, you quite rightly alluded to the very important subject of the number of social and council homes that are being built in London. So if you are that concerned, why has it taken so long for you to appoint a Deputy Mayor for Housing? Could you let us know when that appointment will take place and whether or not you have any particular people in mind?
Thank you for your question, and thanks for your interest in housing, bearing in mind your other role in the Housing Committee. At the moment, Jules Pipe is the Deputy Mayor for Housing, the job previously done by James Murray MP. I hope to make an announcement in due course and certainly before the next Mayor's question time.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Okay, right. Then let's go to the order paper. And the first question to you, Mr Mayor, is Crossrail 2 from Assembly Member Devenish.
Thank you. TfL has always been open about the costs of Crossrail 2, and current cost estimates include an additional 54% to allow for risk. This is in line with Treasury requirements. Regarding timings, I believe it is still possible to deliver Crossrail 2 in the 2030s, but as has always been the case, this will require government support and funding. Crossrail 2 is learning lessons from a wide range of major infrastructure projects, and the project team has undertaken extensive benchmarking exercises, including internationally. Of crucial value has been its detailed analysis of the actual cost of Crossrail, including the current overruns. That analysis has confirmed that TfL's estimates for Crossrail 2 are prudent. The Crossrail 2 team has also subjected its cost estimating and programming approaches and benchmark analysis to external scrutiny and assurance. This has included extensive work in 2018 by the government's independent affordability review, work by Treasury's project assurance reviews, and review by a dedicated independent assurance panel established jointly by the DfT and TfL to scrutinise the project. All this has endorsed TfL's cost and programme projections for the scheme. Progressing the scheme at the pace we would like will require us to reach agreement with the government around funding for the scheme. We've set out in detail how London could fund 50% of the cost. However, Mayoral Community Infrastructure Levy funds, MSIL, earmarked for Crossrail 2, have been temporarily diverted to repay the central government package to complete the Elizabeth line. This means that unless there are other ways of agreeing with the government how construction will be funded, London will not now be able to pay its 50% without delaying Crossrail 2. We will be in discussion with the government ahead of this year's spending review to explore options in this context for taking Crossrail 2 forward to the next stage. Can I just end by saying this? I'm very much in favour of proper investment in all the regions of the country, but this cannot be a zero-sum game. If crucial investment in London suffers as a result, then since it remains the engine of the national economy, this will not ultimately help other regions. We need investment in both Northern Powerhouse Rail and in key London infrastructure improvements, including Crossrail 2.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I totally agree with your last statement there. But just for the record, to be clear, are you for or against High Speed 2, please?
For.
But you do recognise that the business case for Crossrail 2 is significantly better than for High Speed 2?
I agree. And actually, one of the things we can pray in aid, and I'm sure the Assembly will join me in doing this, is that the National Infrastructure Commission report also agreed that actually investing in infrastructure in London benefits the country. You'll be aware of the figures and also the business case as well that you've alluded to.
Thank you. And you'll be aware of a recent poll by Savanta that found that 3/4 of London businesses believe that High Speed 2 is too expensive, while 64% thought, quote, the project has or will cause too much disruption. Do you back London's businesses on that?
Well, I think we've got to be a bit careful here because we've got to be careful not to give the impression that London is in favour of investment in infrastructure in London, but against and at the expense of infrastructure around the country. I'm well aware of businesses, particularly those businesses in London that have offices and presences across the country, who know the benefits to our country of increased investment in infrastructure projects. I think we can invest in both Crossrail 2, High Speed 2 and other big projects across the country, and the Chancellor indeed has said that he'll be announcing significant funds to infrastructure, and I'm looking forward to him agreeing that it's not a zero-sum game.
Thank you. And on Crossrail 2, would you agree that we haven't made that much progress in your 3.5 years as mayor? And what more can you do, please?
Well, I've got the timeline, and actually one of the reasons for the delay is the delay from the previous DFT run by the previous Secretary of State. I'm really pleased the current Secretary of State is quite keen to make progress. So, for example, in 2016, we were talking to the government before the reshuffle. We gave the government the further evidence they required, and they've been reviewing that for some time. They asked for a further strategic business case, which we've submitted to the government. They've had it since last year. So look, we've been responding to all the additional information requested from the government, and if criticism has been made, and I think that's what you're alluding to, about any delay, that criticism should be directed towards the government, not City Hall or TfL.
And on Crossrail 2, would you agree, because it is an infrastructure project, it's all about homes and jobs, and can we get those large figures across in terms of more investment equals more homes and jobs for London?
Absolutely, but the other big point, and you'll be aware of this from your interest, is it's not just Londoners who benefit. Both Crossrail 1, which starts outside London and ends outside London, and Crossrail 2 is more jobs and more homes for everyone. But you'll also be aware the jobs created on the supply chain benefit the entire country as well. So it's really important that we persuade the government this is a national infrastructure investment with huge benefits in jobs, in homes, but also in infrastructure as well.
Thank you. I'll leave it there.
Okay. Next question is in the name of Assembly Member Curtin, Airborne Particulate Matters.
Thank you, Chair. All Londoners deserve to breathe clean air. We've been cleaning up since I became mayor our buses and taxi fleets, improving air quality around schools, supporting Londoners to make more trips by active or sustainable modes, and encouraging the switch to electric vehicles. Last year, we introduced the ultra-low emission zone in the face of opposition from some members of the Assembly, the world's toughest vehicle emission standards in central London to reduce toxic air pollution and protect public health. The ULEZ is really having a real impact, with roadside nitrogen dioxide pollution reducing by around a third in the zone. This shows we can achieve what we can achieve if we're brave enough to implement such ambitious policies. When it comes to hazards to human health, I take my advice from medical experts. The WHO state there is no safe level for ambient particulate matter, and there is evidence of some health effects even at lower levels. They've set an annual average recommended guideline of 10 micrograms per cubic metre. The best current evidence links concentrations above this level to the most severe health impacts. This standard refers explicitly to particulate matter in ambient outside air. There is not yet an equivalent for indoors. This limit is under review by medical experts and will continue to be led by evidence. Despite recent improvements, the vast majority of Londoners still live in areas that exceed this limit, and that's unacceptable. That's why, under my leadership, London was the first world megacity to pledge to meet the WHO guidelines by 2030, and my environment strategy lays out the necessary actions to bring London's toxic air down to these safer levels, including expansion of the ULEZ. But we can't do it alone. We need the support of central government and, crucially, the additional powers I've requested to take non-transport sources of toxic pollution.
Thank you for your answer, Mr. Mayor, but you must know that the legal limit for PM 2.5s, which is the measure is usually taken as, is 25 micrograms per cubic metre, and that's been decreasing since 2008, before you became mayor. Yes, it has decreased as well since you've been mayor, but it was already going down beforehand. But on the tubes, in the Victoria line, we have a level of 361 micrograms per cubic metre. That's 15 times the legal limit set by the European Union, which you so love. Now, is that a matter of urgency for you to deal with, Mr. Mayor?
It is a matter of urgency. Can I just distinguish tube dust and the particulate matter we see in the ambient outdoor air? Tube dust tends to be iron oxide, and there's some work being done by experts from around the world who include Europeans who are EU citizens, some who are British residents, some who aren't. So TfL commissioned a report from the Committee on the Medical Effects of Air Pollution that concluded there were currently insufficient evidence of the health effects of underground particulate matter, and more research is needed. So we've commissioned the research. We're working with others to do further research, including King's, Imperial, and Queen Mary, but it is a source of concern, and that's why we've paid for a cleaning exercise, and this has led to proactive action to prevent and contain tube dust at source, which is a £60 million cleaning regime. And the good news is, initial trials have showed a 73% reduction in respirable dust on the Piccadilly line following the trial, and we're now going to go into doing a similar trial on the Bakerloo and the line you mentioned, the Victoria line as well.
Okay, thank you for your answer. It's good there's been a reduction. But there was a letter from TfL written to the Environment Committee in October that said they're actually going to be testing for chromium-6 and arsenic. Now, arsenic, you know, is a highly toxic substance, and chromium-6 is a class 1 carcinogen. And what will you do if it's found that there are significant levels of those two substances in the air that people are breathing in the tubes?
Well, I hope you're reassured by the fact that TfL is leading the way. We're not burying away reports, or what we're doing instead is commissioning reports to find out what the situation is. TfL will do what they always do, which is follow the advice from the experts where they can. You'll be aware, one of the challenges we have is TfL is the oldest underground in the world. It's very deep. Some of the tunnels are very narrow, which means the space is very limited between the train and the station. We'll do what needs to be done to make sure we improve the situation.
Great. Well, that deals with the underground. Now, let me ask you another question about what's happening above ground, because you know, we know that PM 2.5s are within the legal limit. We know that nitrogen dioxide levels have come down, but you're proposing that from October 2020 that lorries will have to pay a £100 fee to come into the low emission zone. That's the whole of Greater London. I mean, and that's not, you know, that's not including more recent lorries, but it's including Euro 4 and 5 lorries, and that's going to be devastating for a lot of businesses, haulage businesses, particularly businesses that have renewed their fleets perhaps in 2014, 2015 and bought a whole new load of Euro 5 lorries to carry out their businesses. Would you consider those plans? I mean, considering the devastating effects that it's going to have on a lot of haulage businesses. I mean, I don't think that's the right thing for you to do in terms of business in London.
Well, the Assembly member in his question referred to the reductions in nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter without giving credit for why that reductions happened. So last year, there was a third reduction in NOx and a 13% reduction in particulate matter directly attributable to the ultra-low emission zone in central London. Now, the obvious question that begs is why can't we increase the pace of progress in reducing nitrogen dioxide, nitrogen oxide and particulate matter? The answer is, with me as Mayor, we can. One of the ways we can do it is this year, you're right, we'll be taking action against the bigger vehicles who are polluting. And the very easy thing to do is to have compliant vehicles. But if you are going to pollute, you should pay. From next year, we'll be extending new lists to up to the North Circular and South Circular for other vehicles currently covered by the central section. And to make this point... Okay, well,
Mr Mayor, I wish we could carry on here, but I'm sort of out of time here. But I don't agree with your assessment that that's the right thing to do for the future. But perhaps we can carry on this conversation over a cup of tea. That would be very nice.
Next question is in the name of Assembly Member Berry, Policies for Fair Affairs.
Thank you, Chair. I froze in TfL fares for the 4th year in a row, making travel more affordable for everyone who lives, works and visits our city. This means many Londoners using TfL services need not pay a penny more than they did in 2016. In contrast, national rail fares have risen by nearly 10% over the same period. I'm proud that by 2020, my fares freeze will have saved the average London household around £200. Under the previous Mayor, TfL fares increased by more than 42% in 8 years. I've consistently called on the government to follow my lead and freeze fares in the rest of the rail network, which would allow travel cards to be included, providing a better deal to London suburban rail passengers who continue to be let down. The government's failure to do this explains why the Centre for London's report indicates that infrequent travellers are favoured over regular travel card users. We know that people on low incomes are particularly reliant on the bus network. Around 60% of all Londoners use the bus at least once a week, compared to over 70% in the lowest income households. And that's why my hopper fare helps those who need it the most. The hopper allows unlimited travel on buses and trams within an hour of only £1.50 and has saved people money on over 450 million journeys since it was launched in September 2016. Travel card and bus and tram pass season tickets can provide good value for those travelling on a regular basis. For example, An annual ticket gives 12 months travel for the price of 10.5 months. Those who have less regular working patterns may benefit instead from pay-as-you-go fares, which have been frozen since 2016. Fares are based on which service you use and the time of travel, and daily cap limits the amount you will pay in a day. With many people now working more flexibly, including working from home and cycling and walking more, using pay-as-you-go is increasingly popular and can represent better value for ordinary travellers and commuters.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I mean, as you point out there, your fares freeze is not a freeze for regular commuters. Our work has shown that someone reliant on a Zone 1 to 4 travel card, for example, is now £253 a year worse off in their travel costs since you became Mayor. And I think Centre for London's report, which is here, Fair Access, makes a very good point about the benefits to infrequent travellers from your policies so far. As well as commenting on your policies as the current Mayor, the Centre for London report also says that a future Mayor should review the zone and fare structure to improve affordability, including reducing the difference in fares between zones, reducing the number of zones, and rezoning particular stations in low affordability areas. Now, I've put this idea forward before. Are you going to model and investigate the benefits of this kind of policy now?
Well, I mean, there's a lot in that question which I'll try and unpick very, very shortly to give time for further questions. But actually, the pattern of travel is for Oyster pay-as-you-go transactions, it's going up. It was 40%, it's now 60%. And for those using travel cards, it's going down 54% to 31%.
Well, that's understandable because they're less good value than they used to be.
What they are is people recognise the benefits of this Mayor's policies and are using the mode of paying which benefits them the most. And what we want to do is persuade the government to do the same as what I've done, which is to lower fares. And the way the government can do that is rather than allowing privatised train operating companies to have services which have cancellations, which are overcrowded and have delays, and where the fares go up, to persuade them to freeze their fares as well. And that's the best way of reducing travel in London.
I mean, I'll come to the fares agreement another time because I haven't got much time. But specifically on the zone inequality, you could move the fare zones around.
Well, that's one thing you could do. You'll be aware what we've done is frozen the fares and introduced the unlimited hopper at the same time as investing in TfL infrastructure going forward. And in the future, Londoners will continue to benefit from our fares freeze, because now what we've priced in is 4 years worth of fares freeze. Even in the future, if we decided to increase TfL fares, you'll have seen the business plan, they still benefit from the freeze we've done over these 4 years in my first term as Mayor.
Well, as I say, the Centre for London report does conclude that regular travellers aren't benefiting from your policies, and I hope you'll look again at the fare zone proposals, which I have put forward before. But I am out of time now. I have to move on to my next question later on.
Assembly Member Duval.
Mr Mayor, I'm not sure if members fully understand why we can't put a fares freeze on those travel cards. Can you just explain, or do you, if I got it right, my understanding is it's not in your control or TfL's control. And if it was in your control, we might well consider it in terms of extending the benefits of a fare freeze. Is that right, or is that correct?
That's absolutely right. And had, for example, the government kept its promise to devolve to us the commuter trains, South Western, South Eastern and Southern, everyone would have benefited from the fares freeze, including those using travel cards. I'd have hoped somebody who believes in devolution would be making the point we should ask the government to keep their promise rather than the point that's been made over the last few minutes of questioning with very little time for answering.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's go on to the next question then, in the name of Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Both our and the government's own previous economic impact assessments have shown that the harder the Brexit, the worse the economic outcome. For all the talk of getting Brexit done, the government has given no consistent indication about what kind of trade deal, if any, it wants. Worse still, the Prime Minister has said he will not extend the transition period whereby EU rules still apply in the UK beyond 31st December 2020. That means we have 11 months to sort out a deal with the EU. Otherwise, all the risks to people and businesses predicted by the government's own Operation Yellowhammer in 2019 will still apply. There could be queues at the border for people and goods, and tariff and non-tariff barriers between the EU and the UK that prevent us from trading goods and services. The government's also said it wishes to diverge from existing EU rules and protections without specifying how. That means there is unlikely to be time to negotiate sensible new agreements with the EU. We've got to be honest with ourselves. All the evidence points to our long-term growth, inward investment and jobs market being hurt by Brexit. London could be less adversely affected than other parts of the UK, but Brexit will leave us worse off. To succeed, the government's negotiations with the EU must secure more than a bare-bones deal for trade and goods. What London needs is an agreement that also protects other invaluable trade and services with the EU. London accounts for half of the UK's exports in services, and services account for 80% of the UK economy. Outside of the EU, I've always said that retaining membership or access to a single market and customs union would be the next best way forward for the UK's economy and people.
I mean, as you know, because I've asked you questions about Brexit before, the two areas that have particularly concerned me have been uncertainty, and in one sense we can say 31st of January, that solved uncertainty. But the other one, as you rightly point out, is the issue of the hard nature of the Brexit. So what does government really need to do if it's focusing in on what London needs now? What can you do to persuade persuade government to provide things that London will need to help us through this difficult period that may emerge after December 2020?
Well, the good news is the Prime Minister has held this office and he understands, and he's spoken about it in the past, the massive contribution London makes to our economy, and indeed the rest of the country makes to London doing so well. I'm sure he won't want to cut off our nose to spite our face. And the key thing is for a deal to be done with the EU. What we can't afford is a cliff edge fall at the end of December 2020. We'll be continuing to work with the government. It's in all of our interests to get a good deal with the European Union. At the end of this month, we do leave the European Union, but we've got 11 months of our transition period. So we've carry on trading with the EU, carry on having the security arrangements we've got with the EU, but that stops in December unless a good deal can be done. And my fear is a bare bones arrangement. And so what I'm hoping the Prime Minister does is use his experience as the Mayor to make sure that he persuades those negotiating on behalf of our country to do a good deal with the EU, and that means a divergence of things rather than moving away from EU rules.
So that we can continue to have those benefits. I mean, one of the areas that has been held back, and I think most financial commentators have said this, and certainly it was also in the Conservative manifesto, the phrase that there's going to be a pent-up tidal wave of investment. Now, I know that yourself and Deputy Mayor Agrawal have worked very hard alongside London businesses and also making some contacts more internationally. Are there any signs of this pent-up tidal wave of investment arriving yet, now that we definitely know what's happening with Brexit?
Well, we're trying hard and we're working with the government on this sort of stuff. I mean, it's in all of our interest to get this investment in London and the country, indeed. I've seen evidence of pent-up. What I've seen is some decisions being delayed or deferred. The good news is a lot of that's not gone elsewhere.
So it hasn't gone elsewhere, because I think that's been a concern, that people have held back. That's one thing, but the idea that the investment has actually gone to Paris or Frankfurt or Dublin is a worry.
It is a worry, but actually our concern should be less that this may go to other parts of the EU, but our real competition is global cities like New York, but also Singapore and Hong Kong. That's, we are compared to and should compare ourselves to. So a small sum has gone, in relative terms, to other European cities, but no other European city can offer what we can offer, which is the full package. And that's why one of the things that I'm doing is to speak up our city, to make sure people realise around the world that the underlying strengths of London will still be there, not just our time zone and our language, but the unique ecosystem, finance, legal, accountancy, life sciences, universities, tech, creative, diversity. And so we'll carry on talking that up to make sure we can compete and get in this investment, pent up or not.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Assembly Member Dismal.
What's your message to European Union citizens living in London who are concerned about their future post-Brexit? Isn't it the case the government intends to introduce a points-based immigration system primarily based on high rates of pay? And what impact do you think this will have on services and industries in London that rely on hard-working EU citizens, for example, the NHS, which is under tremendous strain? University College London Hospital has 15% of its staff coming from other EU countries, Royal Free 14%, Camden and Islington 13%. And as we all know, A&E waiting times are going through the roof. The 4-hour target time was met in only 77% of cases at UCLH last month and 80% at Royal Free. Yet we've seen the staffing shortages getting worse as people from the NHS either go home or don't apply in the first place.
Well, despite, you know this as well as I do, because of your conversation with your constituents and others, even though we've not yet left the EU, we've already seen in the last 2.5, 3 years some of the consequences of the referendum vote. It is the case that we've got record numbers of vacancies in the NHS, social services, I talked about the social care issue with care workers, but also you know how reliant we are in construction, in hospitality of EU citizens, but also a crude point system doesn't recognise the needs of our city. For example, how many points would somebody working in restaurants and hotels receive, or social care, or some jobs in the NHS? A significant number of London's economy is the lower skilled workers as well. We'll carry on talking to the government to persuade them. The good news is that this Prime Minister is far less anti-immigration than the last Prime Minister was. I mean, she was clearly anti any form of immigration and recognising the benefits to our country. This Prime Minister, when he was Mayor, talked about an amnesty, and so he understands the contribution made economically, socially and culturally. My job is to persuade him to make sure any new system doesn't detriment our city.
Thanks. And would you also agree that Brexit's created the potential for an even deeper crisis if the 260,000 European national children and 96,000 European national young people living in the capital aren't supported in applying to the EU settlement scheme or for citizenship? It's the case, isn't it, that the Conservative government hasn't learned the lessons of the Windrush scandal, which caused such distress, loss, hardship or worse? Those who came as children to the UK in the 50s and 60s, aren't they creating the same conditions for EU child migrants of today?
Absolutely. I raised this point last week when the research was done by the University of Wolverhampton about the numbers of Londoners who are undocumented, have not had their status regularised. They're entitled, many of them, to apply for nationality, but it costs more than £1,000. You'll be aware how much that deters people from applying. You saw what happened with the Windrush generation and their children. At the moment, before the secured status kicks in at the end of December in relation to us properly leaving the EU end of transition, we have north of 500,000 Londoners who aren't properly documented. More than 100,000 are children. We often come across this when these children who are born here apply to university and discover they're not home students. And so I'm really concerned about the numbers of those who are undocumented and how that impacts them, but also going forward, even if 10% don't get their status sorted out, that's more than 100,000 in London, many of them children. I worry about the ability of the Home Office and UKBA to deal with that, which is why I'm lobbying the government to make it far easier, far cheaper, but also to give advisors legal aid to give advice to these people who clearly need some assistance to regularise their status.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. Well, we wish Assemblymember Copley a speedy recovery, and the question is going to be taken by Assemblymember Duval in his absence.
Thank you, Chair. Given the capital's chronic housing shortage, so it is concerning to see an increase in the number of empty homes in London. While I don't have specific powers to bring empty homes back into use, many councils are working hard to do just this. Unfortunately, the tools available to them are limited. Councils can use empty dwelling management orders, known as EDMOs, to take over management of unoccupied homes and bring them into use as rental properties. My London Plan and London Housing Strategy outline my support for local authorities which wish to use these powers. Since 2012, the government's restricted the circumstances in which EDMOs can be used. A home now has to be empty for 2 years rather than 6 months before an EDMO can be issued, and an owner has to have 3 months' notice. This has significantly reduced the effectiveness of EDMOs. Councils can also levy a council tax premium on empty homes. The government's increased this premium last year. However, it still doesn't go nearly far enough to disincentivise owners from leaving properties empty. Given the low levels of council tax as relative to property values, the premium's really high enough to have an impact. Band A, B and E properties in Westminster, which have been empty for 2 years, would need to pay only £529 extra, even if the property is worth millions. And that's why I've called on the government to give councils themselves the powers to set the premium level. We know there are different reasons for homes being empty. I've asked my team to commission research into definitions and data on empty homes to better understand this issue and ensure any future policy interventions are underpinned by strong evidence. And in the meantime, I'll continue to do all I can to support councils to tackle this issue and the wider housing crisis.
Well, thank you, Mr Mayor. I mean, clearly, one of my own local authorities in my constituency, Greenwich Council, is now consulting about introducing a 200% council tax for homes that have been vacant more than 5 years. And clearly government wants to do something about this, but this problem is increasing, as the original question said. Is there a case for even further action that you've said? Both the previous mayor's financial commission, your financial commission, highlighted this as a problem. Is there an issue about definition and the self-reporting here between empty homes and derelict homes? Different strategies are required for both. Is there something further that we should be considering around that? Is there something jointly we can say to government and say, is there a new initiative? One of the arguments that I'm unclear on, but should we ask for further development around the council tax and do a London-wide issue, a much more greater concerted action than with the range of tools that we've got to try and break this issue down further?
I mean, absolutely. You referred to, rightly so, the previous mayor's London Finance Commission report, and I commissioned another London Finance Commission report with the same team that Boris Johnson used. We need far more devolution, fiscal devolution as well. But also, I trust councils, and you mentioned your council, who know their communities far better. Definitions aside, councils often aren't investing the staff for good reasons in trying to find empty properties, because even with a 200% premium, that's not a lot when you bear in mind the equity value and how much it affects a property owner, particularly an absentee landlord who lives overseas. So it's a conversation we will have with this Prime Minister in relation to London Finance Commission, but also I'm not asking for the powers for myself, City Hall. I'm saying give councils this power to take action.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next question in the name of Assembly Member O'Connell, Borough Needs.
Thank you, Chair. When I was elected, I said I'd be the mayor for all Londoners, and that's what I'm doing. My team and I work closely with London boroughs, all of them, sub-regional partnerships and London councils as important partners in making London a better place to live, work, visit and do business with. I engage extensively with all boroughs through key strategic forums such as London councils, a London Culture Forum, advisory groups and established partners networks. When it comes to delivering for boroughs, teams from City Hall provide technical and capacity building support in the context of substantial and ongoing government cuts to their budgets. I've awarded over £1 billion to all 27 councils which bid for money through the Building Council Homes for Londoners programme. On skills and employment, I've allocated over £62 million for adult education budget to 31 London boroughs, including the City of London. On transport, TFL works with boroughs at all levels with dedicated area-based teams who build in-depth local knowledge. And since 2017, my Greener City Fund has supported projects to plant trees and improve green spaces in all 32 London boroughs. My bid-based strategic programmes across a number of policy areas are competitive and open to all boroughs. When allocating funds, I'm always mindful of the need to ensure investment reaches across London's boroughs. For example, whilst bids to my Good Growth Fund are open to partners across London, in each round, the assessment process uses the most up-to-date national data sets in order to match the spread and impact of investment across London according to need. We consider current and future housing requirements, capacity for new homes and the requirement of different subgroups of the population and where the strongest cases for investment are made. And through my £70 million Good Growth Fund regeneration programme, I've so far awarded £51 million to 50 projects across London, including £30 million directly to London boroughs, with successful bids to the third and final round to be announced in March.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think that's well put. Although your response was a strategic response across all of London, the exchange I want to have with you is around, under your mayoralty, a neglect for my part of London. I refer particularly to the recent Independent Assembly report mapping the mayor's strategies, which ranked Croydon the 24th and Sutton at the bottom 32nd. Mapping out your investments and the GLA family's investment. Remember, those residents pay the same tax. So I'd be interested, Mr Mayor, in your thoughts around that. So first question particularly is, The previous mayor, I was also a critic of him regarding dealing with Outer London, but under your mayoralty, you have scrapped the Outer London Commission and you scrapped the Outer London Fund. Why did you do that?
Well, what we've done is, as new administrations, to look at new ways of getting money to those parts of London that need the most. The report you referred to, by the way, was a poor report. It may be independent, but it's still poor. It didn't fully reflect all the investment given to all parts of London revenue as well as capital, but also failed to recognise the benefits other parts of London receive from an investment in one part of London. For example, a Crossrail station in one borough doesn't just benefit the residents of that borough, nor does a cultural investment like the East Bank benefit just Newham. But we're looking to invest in all parts of London, including Croydon and Sutton as well.
Well, I'd contend that, yes, if a Sutton resident commutes, that person will use the underground and get benefit from that. But there are many thousands of residents in outer South London who are dependent on the services within their boroughs, and they're not availing themselves of facilities in other boroughs. So you scrap the Outer London Fund, scrap the Outer London Commission. Let's turn to more specifics. I did mention Sutton. So again, they're paying the same council tax and contribution to your precept as other Londoners. They've got the lowest mayoral funding. They've also got no tube stations, tram stops, London Overground, Crossrail, Crossrail 2, etc. You're letting down the residents of Sutton under your mayoralty, Mr Mayor. It's patently obvious.
Well, firstly, I don't accept your figure in relation to Sutton receiving the least amount from City Hall. But you will be aware, for example, the conversations we've had with the London Borough of Sutton in relation to the tram extension. And the key decision for Sutton and Merton is in relation to how they can work with us. And I've been optimistic with the conversations we've had with both leaders and their teams, most recently going up to Nottingham, to see how the trams benefit in Nottingham and how they could pay for the tram. You'll be aware, for example, of the fantastic work done in Sutton by the London Cancer Hub, and we recognise that and want to help that as well. But it's not, surely you're saying the responsibility of this mayor that 150 years ago the Victorians didn't build a tube station in Sutton or Croydon. You'll be aware that what we've got is a legacy where there are more tube stations north of the river than south of the river. That's one of the reasons why we've increased bus services in outer London, including South London, because we recognise that there needs to be increased bus services there. And that's why we're investing more bus mileages and more bus services in outer London to recognise the lack of tube facilities in Croydon. You'd also be aware of my lobbying for us to take over commuter trains, so the residents of Sutton and Croydon could benefit from TfL running those lines rather than privatised train operating companies.
OK, let's get back to buses. Thank you for reminding me on that. I've for a long time with other colleagues been talking about trying to rebalance the numbers of buses from central London to outer London, where people in outer London are far more reliant. That has failed, I think, under your mayoralty. And indeed, in Croydon Town Centre, you've cut buses. So I would suggest, Mr Mayor, that you haven't put extra bus services in outer London, and yet there's later questions on that. Around that. So why have you failed in that aspiration, Mr Mayor?
Firstly, we haven't. The bus mileage or kilometre mileage in outer London is going upwards because we are reconfiguring bus services across London. And by the way, the question later on is an example of criticism from your side about us trying to have more buses in outer London. So it'd be nice if the Tory group could reach agreement amongst themselves what they want me to do. But I agree with you on this one, and not other members of the Tory group, that we should be increasing bus services in outer London. That's what our plans are showing us doing, and we'll carry on doing that over the next few years. One of the things your residents benefit from is the unlimited hopper, arguably more than those in other parts of the city. And I'm really pleased that a significant number of those people who use the unlimited hopper are in Croydon and Sutton.
OK, Mr Mayor, last couple of pieces on me. I mean, I think it's fair to say that residents in outer South London particularly feel that the mayoralty and the GLA bodies are institutionally biased in favour of zones 1, 2 and 3. So my last point really is you scrapped the Outer London Fund and replaced it by the Good Growth Fund, I think you said earlier, and have invested money across London as opposed to specifically in Outer London. I thank you for the funding in South Norwood. You've invested there, and South Norwood residents appreciate that. And by by happy coincidence, I think there's a fresh application coming to you from outer South London. I hope you can support. But I would say, finally, Mr Mayor, is that at the end of your 4 years, I think your morality has not served outer South London well. And I'd like you to reflect upon that.
Is that a question, Chair?
It is a question. How would you respond to that?
No, I think you've got a number of things to answer there.
Yeah, quite. Well, firstly, I think
I'm not asking more, I just want the answer.
as is often the case,
Briefly, sir.
As is often the case, Assemblyman O'Connell has been quite fair in relation to recognising his question he called it institutional biases of City Hall in relation to Outer London.
That's
I infer from the institutional bias, it also refers to previous mayors and previous administrations. I think that's a recognition in the question and the questioner of the institutional bias in City Hall.
No mayors are blame this, Mr Mayor. No mayors are blame this in this. But I'm speaking to your mayorality.
No, get an answer.
That's one of the reasons why I thought he'd welcome me changing the policies of the previous mayors. Because on the one hand he's saying they've been biased against Outer London. On the other hand, he's criticising me for changing their policies that have led to the bias.
Thank you for your...
And here's the good news. I've got a full list that is 2 pages long, which I'm happy to read through, of all the investment we have been given since I became mayor in housing, in environment, in transport, in the Young Londoners Fund, in policing and crime, and in culture to both Croydon and in infrastructure, in skills and employment to both Croydon and Sutton. With your permission, Chair, I'll read through these 2 pages of notes which demonstrate the huge investment that Croydon and Sutton receive because I am the Mayor of London.
I should look forward to you writing to me, Mr Mayor. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm so tempted to use Chair's prerogative because sometimes it reminds members that they open up a line of attack from you, which you shouldn't be given. But no, you can't read it. Send it to the member and copy everybody else in. Let's move on to the next question. You did indicate, Assembly Member Duval.
A very quick intervention, requiring a very quick answer, Mr Mayor. I was going to say, is there an election this year in London? But the question that I need to put to you, in that report that was earlier indicated by the Assembly member, that was only a very small proportion of resources allocated by the GLA under your mayoralty to Outer London. Is that right? Is it about a third of the spending? It's probably, I probably might have that wrong, but in my mind, I think it's there. There's 2/3 still to be allocated that I think the member wasn't generous enough to concede was being spent in both Outer London in terms of people getting their fair shares in the resources.
Well, Senator O'Connell is usually incredibly fair, but one can tell there's an election coming because even he has cherry-picked figures from a report that wasn't checked with relevant officers who would have pointed out the various problems with the report, but he's a good guy. He's a Tory, though, and so you can forgive him for cherry-picking a partial report less than 100 days, just over 100 days before an election.
Thank you.
Okay. No, nothing else on this. Let's move on then to the next question. Assembly Member Arbour, London safety.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the safety of Londoners is and always will be my first priority. I've been trying to persuade the government to be tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime over the last 3.5 years. We've had a decade of catastrophic cuts to the Met Police Service. Crime has increased across the country. Officers in London have fallen to levels not seen since 2003. Vital preventative services like youth clubs and sports facilities have been lost, and victim support organisations have been forced to close their doors. In contrast, I've worked tirelessly with the police, partner agencies and communities to keep Londoners safe in the face of these challenges created by the government. We've ensured that City Hall provides more funding for police and community safety than ever before. Police numbers after years of decline due to government cuts are starting to increase, and there's now a dedicated violent crime task force working day and night in the areas worst affected. But we know that enforcement is only one element of the fight against crime, and that's why I've also made unprecedented investment in prevention. This includes creating a £45 million Young Londoners Fund to keep young people on a positive path, and the establishment of London's first ever violence reduction unit, bringing together partner agencies and communities to address the underlying causes of violence over the long term. As Mayor, I can only plug some of the gap. We need the government to provide more funding for our police service as well as vital preventative services. The Prime Minister has this week said he's going to chair a new law and order task force. I'm glad the government has finally woken up and the PM is taking this seriously. I've been calling for government leadership on this issue for years. I wrote to the previous Prime Minister asking for this action in early 2018 and convened a summit at City Hall with the Home Secretary and Commissioner. As the chair of the National Police Chiefs Council has said, policing is only one part of the picture. We must remain focused on making London a safer city for us all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. You've confirmed what you have said 3 times in the past 6 months, that London is safer because of you. You've listed just now all the good things that you've done. Would it be fair to say anything which is good in relation to policing is down to you, and anything which is bad is somebody else's fault?
I think it's a partnership between City Hall, the government, the Met Police Service, councils, probation, education providers, faith leaders, families. I'm a firm believer in the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. And so there have been challenges caused by massive cuts from central government, which even you would have to accept, because now your candidate is talking about them with an election approaching around the corner. I think cuts have consequences. I tried to make this point to the previous 2 Prime Ministers who failed to accept this. This Prime Minister appears to have accepted this.
So you would be saying, would you, to those people who are related to the record number of people who have been murdered in this city, you will be saying to the people who have been affected by the record level of knife crime that that's nothing to do with you?
Well, actually, I meet often bereaved families affected by knife crime, and I don't want to play political footballs with the families. And what I do when I meet with them is obviously give my condolences, find out more about their loved one, see if interventions could be made earlier. When I'm asked, I explain some of the things that we are doing. The families that I've met understand the complexities of the causes of violent crime, but also understand some of the challenges that we have.
But none of it's your responsibility. Well, it's somebody else's fault. It's not me, Gov.
Well, actually, I'm the Mayor of London. The buck stops with me as the Mayor of
Indeed
London.
It does.
I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner. One of the jobs I have to do as the Mayor of London is to explain some of the consequences of the cuts, but also to lobby the government. Had I not been talking about the consequences of cuts, we would have not been successful in persuading this Prime Minister to reverse some of the cuts. I've been criticised by Conservative members of this Assembly for talking about cuts over the last 3.5 years. Now that the Prime Minister has recognised this, there's no recognition from your side that actually some of that lobbying and talking about it has made a difference.
Well, of course, Mr. Mayor, this side has said that there are certain areas where you have increased expenditure unnecessarily, i.e. in the bureaucracy in this place, money which you could have spent on policing.
Well, let's talk about money spent on
however,
policing.
something which is directly your responsibility in relation to policing actually is the operation of MOPAC. Do you read the MOPAC reports?
Most of them, yeah.
Did you read the last annual report, the last monthly report?
I'm not sure.
Well, let me tell you one thing that if you had read it, I'm quite certain you would have taken notice of it. Did you see in the MOPAC report that there is the lowest level of public satisfaction in policing in London since records began, and that's entirely on your watch?
Well, let's deal
Did you notice that?
Let's deal with the issues raised.
No, please. Did you know that currently there is the lowest level of satisfaction with the MPS since records began?
Well, let's deal with that. In relation to, you mentioned expenditure, you mentioned spending, you mentioned bureaucracy in your question, which I'm sure the Chair will allow me to respond to. So City Hall has been invested since I became Mayor, far more in policing from City Hall than the previous Mayor over the 8 years, even though he knew in 2010, because of the advice from advisors in number 10, there were massive cuts in Met Police funding. So in my first year as Mayor, we invested £27 million in the Met Police Service. In my second year, we invested £110 additional million in policing services. In my third year, £235 million in policing across London. What it doesn't do is fill the massive hole left by government cuts, which now approach almost £900 million. So we are filling the massive hole left by government, but it's hardly surprising that many Londoners who often don't see a police officer Many Londoners who remember the huge numbers of officers there used to be under a previous government don't see police officers now, are dissatisfied with the service received from our under-resourced and overstretched police. And that's one of the reasons why, in addition to expending more in policing, we've been lobbying the government to get more resources in policing as well. So there's no surprise there that Londoners are dissatisfied with the cuts made by the government over the last 8-9 years.
No, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, you didn't answer my question. Were you aware, because it's in your MOPAC report, that public satisfaction with policing in London is lower than it has ever been before?
I'm aware of the levels of satisfaction in the police amongst Londoners. One of the issues we raised at the London Crime Prevention Board this week is how we can give Londoners more confidence to, for example, report crime, to be witnesses, to come forward, and also to join the police service. The good news is that with the increase in recruitment of police in London, because of City Hall investment, we're now starting to see more police joining the police service. And that will lead to, I'm sure, Londoners being more satisfied with the response from the police because of this investment.
You say that, Mr. Mayor. You're simply repeating the trope which we always get here, that if it's good, you're responsible. If it's bad, someone else is responsible. In effect, you are saying to us that the only reason that public satisfaction in policing is low is because, according to you, there is a lack of government expenditure on policing. I would say to you that the real reason for public dissatisfaction in policing is the very high level of homicide rate, which is in London, which even for those people who live in out of London probably are not directly affected, are very worried by, are very concerned by, and they see it going up and up and up. The same applies to knife crime. And it cannot be said that those two things are due simply to lack of government expenditure on policing, which is your claim, and it's manifestly wrong. And I would say to you this, that Londoners, the average Londoner, knows that to be true, and that is why public satisfaction is so low.
Chair, is that a question or is that a speech?
It was a speech.
Okay. I think there is a number of questions around that you'll be able to come in and,
Thanks, Chair.
and respond to. And I recognise Assemblymember Hall for a follow-up question.
Yes,
Sorry, can I not respond to the last speech?
No, that was him just speechifying.
Okay, fine.
Mr. Mayor, coming in on the back of my colleague, who's completely right, staffing costs at City Hall are going up to 65 million. That's double what it was in Boris Johnson's last year, double. And quite frankly, people out there are far more interested in being kept safe. So it's down to you to make sure that the Metropolitan Police can keep them safe. And looking at the figures, they're not being kept safe. So you should be looking at where you're spending your money, because I would say to you, people don't want people in this building. They actually want police officers out there keeping them safe. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Chair, is that a second speech?
No.
Have we changed the rules of MQTs?
No, again, that was a member going off speechifying. But if you, Mr. Mayor, want to make a comment in what you have just heard from the two mayors, I'm happy to give you the floor.
Well, Chair, I'll make two short points in response to two long speeches. Which the first short point is, we have invested from City Hall record sums in the Met Police Service, but the context is huge cuts from central government. And if the Conservatives didn't accept that cuts have consequences, if the Conservatives didn't accept they made a huge error in making these cuts to the police service in 2010, which were repeated for the last 9 years, why they're now doing a partial U-turn is because they recognise the consequences of their cuts. And the second point I'd make in relation to City Hall during my mayoralty versus the previous mayor and the one before him is we're doing far more now than any previous administration has done. So, for example, we now have, from a deal done with the government in housing, £4.82 billion to spend building affordable homes in London. That requires staff to administer that fund to make sure the homes are being built, because they weren't being properly checked. There wasn't the due diligence. I'd be criticised for not doing that due diligence. I'll give you another example, Mayor, of the additional powers we've got since I became Mayor. We're now responsible for adult education. This is a budget north of £300 million. Now, if I wasn't in City Hall having staff to administer this budget, to make sure it's spent properly, I'd be criticised by members of the Tory Assembly for not making sure we got value for money. I'll give you another example of some of the big changes made since I have been Mayor. The previous Mayor buried away reports which showed the consequences of our poor quality air in London. That included, well, it's a, you know, it's a...
Mr. Duval, can I just I've just finished with the Mayor. And it's all the mutterings around I'm not listening to. Mr. Mayor, can you make a final comment, please?
Well, I've only got through second of the points that they've made, but on air quality, the previous Mayor buried away...
No. Safety. You go too far. OK, let's move on. What was the point of order, Assembly Member Duval?
The point of order is Assembly Member Hall introduced the wider topic, which the Mayor was responding to and right to respond to.
I have dealt with that.
And quite frankly, he had a legitimate right to respond to Tories. It's no good muttering and saying we started off with crime, and actually Assembly Member Hall introduced the wider issues about staffing issues and value for money about what we were providing here. Chair, if I could ask, if only, and I know it's very difficult in the Chair, that maybe if you could intervene to say actually it wasn't appropriate to raise that topic, and maybe we need to discipline ourselves around those issues if we don't feel comfortable with the way Mayor's answering it.
Good, you know, thank you for that. And I think what I'm showing is that I believe people are in here and are watching and are wanting a mayoral response to questions. And they're also wanting to hear a mayoral response to comments made about mayoral action. So I shall chair the meeting accordingly. And thank you. And members just need to maybe go back to their training notes about, you know, how do you put a question, then wait for an answer, and then maybe put a follow-up question? Now, that would be unique, wouldn't it, and really interesting. I say no more. Let's move on, because we've now got a fabulous questionnaire. Anybody else following up? No? No, Assembly Member Sehota didn't indicate. No. So, this is a question in the name of Assembly Member Pigeon, who's one of the most expert questionnaires we have round the table, and it's electric charging point. Just show us how to do this, Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you, Chair. Thousands of Londoners die early each year because of toxic air pollution, and we're facing a climate emergency that threatens the long-term security and well-being of every Londoner. I'm taking action by rolling out the world's first ultra-low emission zone, encouraging more Londoners to use public transport by freezing fares and introducing the hopper fare, and I'm helping people switch to electric vehicles where they're needed. The progress we've made is clear. When I became Mayor in 2016, there were no electric taxis licensed. We now have over 3,000. We now have the largest electric bus fleet in Europe, and last year I established a groundbreaking electric vehicle infrastructure task force. The task force made up of industry experts who, together with my team, engaged over 140 organisations and published a robust charging infrastructure delivery plan for the capital. Whilst the plan looks out to 2025, the task force were very clear that setting a specific target for provision of charge points year on year is not practical. Instead, they identified the necessary enabling work to continue our record delivery and to review progress against potential scenarios, especially given the pace at which vehicle technology is developing and charging requirements are changing. London begins this decade in a strong position, and the government acknowledges London leads the electric vehicle infrastructure revolution. Due to our work over the last 3 years, we have a quarter of all charging points in the UK and over 300 rapid charging points, more than New York or Amsterdam, of which 226 have been delivered by TfL. And I'm delighted London's first rapid charging hub was launched in Stratford in December. This has contributed to my target of 300 rapid chargers in place by the end of 2020. Thanks to joint GLA, London Council's TfL Go Ultra Low City scheme, over 1,700 charge points have been installed near homes, many retrofitted in lamp columns, and a further £4 million has been allocated to deliver 1,000 more this year across 29 boroughs. However, our record delivery in London will be worthless unless the government acts now to make their climate change commitments and Road to Zero ambition a reality.
Thank you very much. You reference your own London Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Delivery Plan, which was published 6 months ago, and that said you're going to need between sort of 2,300 and 4,100 rapid charge points. However, this was based on modelling of year-on-year sales growth of 35%. But last year we saw a rise in sales of electric vehicles in the UK of 144%. So I'm just wondering how you think you're going to meet this demand if sales in electric vehicles continues in this way.
Well, at the moment, thanks for your question. And by the way, thanks for your interest and your work in this over the last few years. What we're doing is making sure we work with the private sector, but also the government to try and make sure we can have the infrastructure there that's required. You'll have heard my answer in relation to the rapid charging hub. One of the reasons why we looked at the hub was because we can see patterns of travel changing. At the moment, there's still a huge amount of capacity in both the rapid charging points and the charging points we have. You'll have seen the media coverage about the grid, whether that's ready to deal with this. And so what we're doing is talking to those who provide the energy as well, to make sure we can have people talking to each other. And you'll also be aware, by the way, because of your expertise in the rapid change of technology. So whereas you'll have seen sort of almost like fridge rapid charging points, even 12 months ago, we're now told we can do it much smaller, which means councils are more willing to give permission. So we're spending a lot of time talking to key experts, and the innovation will drive, I think, rapid change.
Lovely, thank you for that. And I accept there's a range of partners who are involved here in the work that's going on. But can I look at a couple of examples of TfL's role? So they contributed to funding rapid charging points in the car park that serves the Aquatic Centre and the Copper Box Arena. Yet in order to use these chargers, drivers have to pay parking charges. And those parking charges are £45. Will you ensure that in future any rapid charging points that TfL contributes to are fully accessible and not subject to these extortionate additional charges?
What we've got to do is make sure we've got something available to everyone. That some people will be using the facilities anyway, and they'll have a rapid charging point available for them, as well as charging points. We've got to make it accessible to everyone. One of the things we're doing is making sure we can get the best deal from the private sector possible in relation to the work they need to do. And so you're right to highlight we've got to make sure it's accessible, that means affordable as well. It's not a one-size-fits-all. And so I would be disappointed if it was the case that all of our schemes were charging. They're not. Many of them are free at point of delivery. Some, by the way, are reserved for the taxis, which I know you support.
Quite right. Well, perhaps you might want to look at that example because that does feel extortionate. But there's also a real issue with the cost of electricity at some rapid charging points. So Heathrow received a £165,000 grant from TfL to support the installation of rapid chargers in the taxi feeder park, really important for tourists to London. Yet now that taxi feeder park is charging so much for the electricity, it costs more to charge their electric taxis than to actually fill up with diesel. So what are you going to do to sort this out so that chargers that you fund, TfL fund, the public fund, are fully accessible and also charge a fair price for electricity?
And this is a really important point, which is that in our keenness to get the rapid charging points up and running, the deals done with the private sector need to be sustainable in the long term. We think government's got a really useful role to play with the economies of scale and their buying power and their convening power. So we're talking to the DfT and the government how they can help us in relation to getting a good deal. But you're right to remind me to make sure that the deals TfL do are good in the long term. So, for example, it's possible we do a good deal with the private sector, which in the first 3 years or first 6 years is great.
Yeah.
What happens after that initial setup of the rapid charging points? We'll continue to pursue this, but also make sure we can get the help of government to get better deals all round.
Well, I hope you could perhaps go and look at this issue at Heathrow because we need taxis to be electric there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's go on next question. Assembly Member Dr. Sahota, winter pressure on year-round crisis in NHS.
Thank you, Chair. After 10 years of austerity, it's no surprise that the NHS is under severe pressure. With a growing and ageing population comes increased and more complex needs. This inevitably costs more to treat. In addition, pressures usually only seen in winter are beginning earlier and lasting longer. In October, not one London NHS trust met the government's own 4-hour A&E waiting target, and that was before winter had begun. That, alongside the unacceptable delays in getting a GP appointment, was a problem. I want to thank and pay tribute to all our hard-working NHS staff who are doing their best under difficult circumstances. There is a staffing crisis, with over 9,500 nursing vacancies in London alone, limiting trust's ability to open extra beds needed for winter, and crumbling hospitals must be dealt with. London needs long-term sustainable funding to address these challenges. Whilst I welcome the government's recent commitment to increasing NHS funding, I'll continue to lobby for the resources London needs. I will also lobby for proper funding for services like social care and public health, which prevent ill health and keep people out of hospital. swingeing cuts to these services have a serious knock-on effect on the NHS.
Well, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for the answer. You know we've had the worst figures for A&E waiting times on history on record. And the government, of course, has a new philosophy now. You know, if you don't like the figures, just get rid of the target. The Secretary of State for Health yesterday said that he was minded to not have any more A&E targets, which actually gives you a temperature of the NHS. What do you think about that?
Well, you will be aware that in the 1990s, before there were targets, we had examples of people waiting for many, many hours, often on a trolley in a corridor, waiting to be seen by experts in A&E. What the targets did, introduced by Labour government, is they drove action in the hospital in relation to making sure the target led to a reduction in waiting times, which led to treatment earlier, which led to better results. And what we see, lo and behold, is a Conservative government now talking about removing the targets because they realise their performance is bad. I worry about the consequences of removing the A&E target, which will simply cover up how bad things are, which most importantly will lead to a bad quality of service received by patients who desperately need medical attention sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mr. Mayor. Of course, the A&E waiting time targets are, just as I say, as temperature. Okay? They don't tell you exactly what's wrong, but you can look at other figures also. The waiting times of ambulances who have to wait for more than 1 hour to drop their patients at the hospital has gone up from 489 to 2,000 last month, right? So 2,000 ambulances waiting for more than a month. The occupancy rate in the hospitals was at 93%, when the safe levels is 85%. We have the lowest level of hospital beds per population in Europe. And of course, the vacancy rate in the NHS is very high. Okay, we are recruiting we need to recruit about 30,000 more nurses and 6,000 more GPs in the country. But these are all markers, I would say, that the NHS has been starved over 10 years of government funding. Do you think the government should take responsibility for the underfunding, the chronic underfunding and strangulation of the NHS over 10 years, over the last 10 years?
Well, after the questions from Assemblymember Arbour, I'm surprised you're not blaming me for the problems in the NHS. This is a good example of what we've seen with the consequences of government cuts. Whether it's the NHS or in the previous example, policing and crime, they've got consequences. And what your question illustrates is the consequences throughout the system.
Yes.
So even though ambulances work incredibly hard to get to a patient who needs to be hospitalised, that ambulance is waiting in a queue to get into a hospital because of a further delay caused by cuts in A&E. That leads to people who can be transferred to a ward being delayed the transfer because of the occupancy levels you referred to because of cuts made by government. Often, you've got patients who could leave the hospital and return in the community, but because of cuts in social care, they can't be released from hospital safely to go back in the community. Now, these guys will probably just blame me, but you know as an expert working in the NHS, these are the consequences of cuts over the last 9 years. That's why the government's got to reverse their cuts, but recognise that NHS inflation means they've got to invest more in real terms, but also with inflation, to give the NHS the resources it so desperately needs.
And of course, London needs more funding. The funding which the government is now promising is really a catch-up, right? I mean, they've starved the NHS for 10 years. What they're putting back now isn't really going to compensate what they've taken out of the system already. London needs more investment, and I think any further attempts to cut hospital beds in London would be a matter of concern for you and for me. I mean, how would you want to deal with if any plans were coming forward for cutting any hospital beds in London?
Well, you led a campaign to stop closures in your constituency in relation to beds and hospitals from the government at a time when the population is rising and clinical needs are rising. That's one of the reasons why I commissioned the King's Fund to do a piece of work, and they set out 6 assurances I now require if an SDP comes forward with plans in relation to hospitals and bed reductions, and those 6 assurances are what they need to look at before they make any decision about reducing beds, let alone closing down wards or closing hospitals.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question in the name of Assemblymember Gavron, Stand Together on Holocaust Memorial Day.
The recent spate of anti-Semitic crimes we've seen in London, New York and elsewhere have made me sick to my stomach, and I condemn them in the strongest possible terms. Anti-Semitism or hate crime of any kind has absolutely no place whatsoever in our city. I've been clear throughout my administration that we take a zero-tolerance approach to anti-Semitism and other hate crimes in London. I encourage those who witness or suffer hate crimes to report it immediately. History warns us of the dangers of allowing anti-Semitism to fester, and it's clear that right now we need to be urgently redoubling our efforts to root it out of our society, no matter where it rears its ugly head. While the solidarity shown by London's many communities in condemning the attacks on our Jewish neighbours is welcome, it's also incumbent on us to do everything we can to prevent those who wish to divide us from succeeding. Earlier this week at Google's London offices, I launched the Shared Endeavour Fund, which will provide grants for local projects designed to strengthen communities and encourage Londoners to stand up to hate, intolerance and extremism. I'll continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Jewish community who make an invaluable contribution to London. Indeed, I was proud to stand with Jewish Londoners, including Assemblymember Gavron, to celebrate Hanukkah in the square last month, and I look forward to welcoming survivors and community members to the Holocaust commemoration at City Hall next week. We must never forget the horrors of the past, and as we see anti-Semitism and far-right extremism on the rise again, it's more important than ever that we stand together against this hatred, uphold our values and celebrate our diversity. That's why yesterday I pledged £300,000 to the Auschwitz-Birkenau Foundation in Poland to help preserve this hugely important site and announce my attendance at the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau later this month.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, for that answer, and it's got great personal resonance for me. I know from my own personal family history how important it is to stand up against prejudice and persecution. Some of my family were rounded up, deported, first to the lodge, the Łódź ghetto, and then to Auschwitz. Not all survived. But my grandparents, who were school teachers in Berlin, when the roundups came, they were tipped off by former pupils every time and went into hiding. Now, we learn from the past how important it is, I think, to speak out, to be in solidarity with fellow citizens. But I think it's for those who witness on the streets, on their commute, witnessing racial abuse, anti-Semitic abuse, it's not easy to intervene. It's important, but it's hard. And I was very encouraged by the report in November of the very brave Muslim woman, Asima Shuaib, who intervened on the tube to challenge when racist abuse was being hurled at a Jewish family. And now, you've said some of this, but how are we going to help Londoners to know not just when they should intervene and that they should, but how they should intervene?
Well, can I firstly thank you for sharing just a part of your family story. I know how difficult it is. I personally have learnt so much and grown so much talking to Holocaust survivors and their families, and we can learn from the past. You mentioned examples of the solidarity shown by your grandparents' pupils in relation to what happened in the 1930s. There are also many people, by the way, who stood by and did nothing. Some actively supported the actions of the Nazis and other extremists. And I think there are lessons to learn today. There are some who are brave, like the woman you referred to. She's a Londoner. She's a Muslim, yes, but she's a Londoner who stood up to the anti-Semite who was so abusive to those Jewish people on the tube train, also Londoners, by the way, as well. We also know, by the way, there are Londoners who stand in silence or actively support or encourage or condone or mainstream the actions of far-right groups as well. And I think we've got to learn the lessons from the past. And that's why it's really important to show solidarity with minorities. And by the way, the Jewish community is a minority. We need to show solidarity with them. And my advice would be is, obviously don't put yourself in harm's way. but we should show solidarity where we can, whether it's standing up to a bully, standing up to a racist, an anti-Semite, or an extremist. And one of the things we've tried to do with the Shared Endeavour Fund is to realise that the communities know best sometimes what to do in relation to spotting a vulnerable person, giving them the resilience and support they need to divert them away from the wrong path, but also to give people the confidence and the tools to challenge some of these messages as well. And that's why we've done this with the Shared Endeavour Fund. And by the way, this is as a result of lots of research we did, listening to and speaking to experts, both experts in the so-called far right, but also experts in the so-called sort of Islamist fanatics as well. It's really important. We learn lessons from the past, and it's at our peril if we don't.
I want to say that I think your efforts and your initiatives this week, particularly that you've just announced, to combat prejudice in society are really welcome. And that contribution to the Auschwitz-Birkenau Fund, and also the fact that you're going there for the 75th anniversary of the liberation is, I think, very symbolic. But as for Shared Endeavour, and I noticed that Google have also contributed to Shared Endeavour, which is good news. But when we think about it, those tech companies, Google, Facebook, Twitter, all are implicated in spreading extremism online. And how are you going to go on challenging them? I mean, I know you're doing it, but go on challenging them to take responsibility for the content they host.
This is a 21st century challenge. So when you talk about your grandparents' experience, ask yourself, how are the messages of hate spread? What are the mediums? And Unmesh Desai sitting next to you, he fought for the NF with many others in the 70s, 80s, and then the BNP. How are the messages of hate from those far-right groups spread? It's a million miles away from what can happen now. You can, in your bedroom, by typing in some buttons, spread a message of hate that's seen around the world. But also you've seen, in real time, terrorists film some of their actions, which are shown in real time and terrorise the rest of us around the world, across oceans and across thousands of miles away. I think social media platforms have a massive responsibility. I think they can and should be doing much, much more. I've talked about that they need to be doing more. I've challenged them. I've criticised them. I even went to South by Southwest to speak to the giants in relation to the responsibilities they have. And I give credit, by the way, to the current Chancellor when he was Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, for the work he's done in this area as well. They can and should be doing more. I think Google deserves credit. Google have stepped up to help us in relation to the issue of violent crime and how sometimes gangs can use social media to spread hate, provoke and retaliate, but also in relation to hate crime as well, where they've invested in AI algorithms, hiring staff, and they've match funded us in relation to the work we're doing. I support that. We're also speaking to other businesses about what more they can do, not just the tech giants, to take down the hateful messages, but also the private sector should be contributing towards the fight against extremism, intolerance and prejudice as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Gavin, we're humbled by the contribution that you've made here this morning, and thank you so much for the dignity that you displayed in raising the question that is so close and dear to you, and reminding us again about the challenges that our Londoners face every day. On Monday, members will know, and I just want to make that announcement, the Assembly and the Mayor, we will show our solidarity at our annual Holocaust service, and I'm sure it will be the usual very moving event here on Monday morning. Thank you so much for that. I now have Assemblymember Prince.
Thank you. No. And I apologise for the level of service that commuters who depend upon the ferry have had to put up with over the last year.
No, it's a supplementary.
I beg your pardon. I'm so sorry, Keith. Sorry.
No. Who's got the supplementary? Sure. Sorry, I've got a supplementary from Assemblymember Bailey.
So I thought it was the next question. Apologies, Chair.
Firstly, thank you, Assemblymember Gavron, for your contributions. Very moving. And it reminded me of time I went to Yad Vashem and hearing those very personal stories of how families were destroyed. and then relating it to the situation we have here in London as well, speaking to some of my friends in the Jewish community. I just have a quick short question for the Mayor. The fund is welcome. Is it going to be are you going to repeat that? Is it a fund you're going to try to do?
I'm really sorry to hear.
Are you going to try to repeat the fund and keep it going, or is it a one-off?
Thanks, Christian. So we've got funding for £800,000 now for the next year. We want the money to be out the door over the next year. Mm-hmm. What we're doing is assessing the funding. There are three streams, up to 10,000, up to 25,000, up to 50,000. We'll be assessing the success and then seeing what we can do going forward. But the £800,000 is to be spent in 1 year. That's the idea.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So then we go on to Assembly Members Prince's question on the Woolwich Ferry.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was a bit too quick last time. Sorry. No. And I apologise for the level of service that commuters who depend on the ferry have had to put up with over the last year. It's not acceptable. The Woolwich Ferry is an important part of London's transport network, and TfL and I take its operations very seriously. That's why TfL has invested in new vessels with much cleaner environmental standards and increased capacity. The new ferries have low-emission hybrid engines that are quieter and emit 90% less particulate matter and 70% less NOx than the legal standards. They also provide 40% more space than the old vessels, can carry 150 passengers and more space for dedicated cyclist spaces. These new low-emission boats are at the cutting edge of the ferry industry, and as with any pioneering technology, there are implementation challenges that need to be overcome. The new ferries have auto-mooring, which uses magnetic technology. This reduces emissions further and improves the ease of boarding and alighting, but this has led to some technical difficulties. TfL requested an urgent action plan from all parties involved, and a task force with engineers has been created to fix these issues. I'm pleased to say there have been significant improvements in the technical reliability of the vessels since the summer, but further improvements still needed. Despite the improved trend in reliability, there have been a number of closures recently. Some of these have been caused by staff shortages and industrial action. Talks are taking place between union reps and the ferry operators, Brig Marine Limited. However, I'm disappointed with the time taken to resolve the outstanding issues. I support TfL in urging all parties to reach agreement as quickly as possible in order to avoid further disruption for commuters who rely on this service.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate your answer. We are short on time, so I want to work with you on this. Can we have your assurance that you will work with unions? I know that there have been a number of strikes. You did promise you'd roll up your sleeves, so let's see if we can work with them. But there's something that came to mind. I did speak with one of the union members, actually, and I'm afraid I can't confirm it, but I think we're both in the same place. You and I both believe that everybody should get the minimum, the London living wage. Now, I was told by this union member that they don't. Are you aware of that?
So just doing 2 points. In relation to the dispute between the trade union and the private company, I'd urge both sides to sort this out. You're right, they should roll their sleeves up, get around the table and resolve this. Secondly, in relation to the living wage, I did receive a report in relation to an allegation that some staff weren't receiving the living wage. I checked it out, and they all are receiving the London living wage. But if there's any offline, if you let me know any other specifics, I'm really happy to chase that up.
I can't confirm, but I was surprised, and I know that we both share that view that people should be paid that. Yeah. So I can have your assurance that all the staff are now receiving the London living wage.
So we received, just to reassure you, we received a similar complaint to one you received, that some staff weren't receiving the London living wage. We checked it out. We've been reassured they are. But if there's other thing that comes to light, please let us know. We will act on it straight away.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. Next question in the name of Assembly Member Twycross. Impact of government's budget on London.
Thank you, Chair. The Prime Minister should know from his time as Mayor, a successful London means successful the UK as a whole. I'm, however, concerned by the increasing anti-London rhetoric from the government and Parliament over the past year. I hope this sentiment will change, not least because we have a Member of Parliament amongst us who knows the great work London does and the Assembly does as well. And I'll be working hard to make the case for government investment in London. Crucial to London's success is the government properly funding the police, working with me to tackle measures to improve London's toxic air, and further upgrades and expansion to London's transport network, hoping to support thousands of new homes. The UK economic benefits of London's status as a global city are not guaranteed. We're in strong competition with other global capitals and rising powerhouse city economies in China and South America. London continues to face major challenges that require government investment and decisive policy intervention if we're to stay ahead of our global rivals. The distribution of wealth and income across London is more unequal than anywhere else in the UK. Median household incomes are no higher than the rest of the UK once housing costs are taken into account, and no other UK region has more households and children living in relative poverty. Part of the solution is freeing up cities to take more responsibility on policy and investment decisions. That's why I welcome the Chancellor's announcement of the English Devolution White Paper, and I've urged the Chancellor to commit to working closely with me and the other English mayors to deliver an ambitious new devolution settlement. As the Prime Minister will know, none of this is possible without stronger financial commitments from the government.
Thank you. I welcome your work and your commitment to persuading the government that while it is important to take into account the need to level up different parts of the country, it needs to not come at the expense of London, which, as you know, is vital to the economy of the whole UK. During the election, obviously, there were quite a lot of commitments by the incoming government, including on additional police officers. I wondered if you could comment on how you're lobbying the Chancellor and the Policing Minister to ensure London gets the long-term funding we need for an additional 6,000 police officers.
So thanks for your question. So the government announced 20,000 additional officers over the next 3 years in England and Wales. It's worth reminding ourselves they promised 40,000 over 3 years. They've cut 22,000 over the last 9 years across the country. So we think a fair proportion of the 20,000 is 6,000, which meant in the first year we should have received 2,000. The government's only given us 1,369, which leaves a balance of, roughly speaking, 4,600, which we need in years 2 and year 3. We've still not been told the monies we'll receive for the 1,369. It's got to be, in proportionate terms, more than what you'd get for an officer in the rest of the country, because it's more expensive in London. So the Commissioner and I are lobbying the government. The Deputy Mayor has met with the Policing Minister, Kit Malthouse. I spoke to him last year as well, and we're currently lobbying both the government, the Home Secretary, the Policing Minister, but also others in government as well, so they understand the importance of us getting the fair share. The good news is we have 2 members of the Assembly who are now members of Parliament, Gareth Bacon and Florence Eshalami. I'm sure they will help us lobby the government. I know both of these MPs, Assembly members, were at the launch, the relaunch this week of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on London, and it's a cross-party group who work really closely with City Hall, and we'll need to work cross-party to persuade the government to give our fair share.
Thank you. And do you share my concerns that the Office for Budget Responsibility's economic forecast will outline the force of the economic hit likely to be caused by leaving the EU, and this could potentially result in less funding for vital projects across London?
It could do, and that's one of the reasons why we've got to make sure that the government gets the point that it's in all of our interests for us to do well. We are leaving the EU. We're going to leave the EU at the end of January. Transition periods will end at the end of December. My message to Brexiteers is, if you want Brexit to be a success, it's important that you help us after we've left the EU. That means not just getting a good deal with the European Union, but also the investment we need. And I'll carry on making the case to the government, and hopefully on a cross-party basis, why we should do this.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Next question is in the name of Assembly Member Desai, detective shortage.
Thank you for raising this important subject. Investigating and solving crimes is vital to bringing perpetrators to justice and keeping the public safe. Police numbers, and inevitably by extension detectives, have been under tremendous pressure in recent years due to government cuts. It is of course much harder to solve crimes with fewer officers in place, and it's only now, thanks to our investment from City Hall, that officer numbers are recovering and bringing much needed relief to detectives and officers in general. It's important to be clear that a shortage of investigative capacity in detectives is a national issue that all forces are struggling to address. The Met have been working extremely hard to increase the investigative capacity. In 2018, the Met established the groundbreaking direct entry pathway for detectives. This enables members of the public to apply directly as a detective without being a regular police constable first, broadening the appeal of this specialised role and improving diversity. In May 2016, the vacancy rate for detectives was 11.5%. As of the end of last year, there were 6,811 detectives, and the vacancy rate has now fallen the 3.4%.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning. So with the announcement of extra officers for the force, surely this is now the chance also to upskill existing police officers into detective level posts to deal with some of the gaps in investigative capacity that has been highlighted by the inspector report and by the Met themselves. So of course we welcome the new officers, but we have existing officers who surely can be upskilled.
Really important point. Thanks for raising that point. So yeah, there's 2 points there. One is we're getting new officers joining, junior officers. They need proper supervision. We can't have a police service that is just made up of newer, inexperienced officers. But secondly, that gives us a chance for those officers who are doing the jobs that these new officers will do to then be skilled up to do more investigations and become detectives. And that's what the Met Police is endeavouring to do and giving them the support to do just that.
Thank you, Mr. But what worries me is that we can have this upskilling of officers and also the new officers, but you can't buy experience, which takes time. And the police watchdog, amongst others, have commented upon the lack of experience and quality in the Met senior investigative teams. How do the Met ensure that its detective level officers have the necessary skill sets to undertake complex investigations? Yeah, and this is thanks for raising this point. This is one of the concerns that the Deputy Commissioner has. One of the challenges we have is officers, when they've done a certain number of years service, retire even though they could carry on working because of the way the pension arrangements work, and it's a real loss to the Met Police Service. What we've tried to do is to bring them back as civilian staff. They're still officers, they've still got lots of experience as former officers, and they're civilians, and they're helping officers do the investigation work, but also making sure police officers are upskilled in relation to the skills they've got in relation to responding to complaints of crime. So we are using all the tools in the toolkit, but I'm always happy to any ideas people have to make sure we get more experience in the Met Police Service. It was a point raised by Senator Hall in the Budget and Performance Committee. It's a real live issue, you know, and we've got to think outside the box how we can keep the experience in the Met Police Service. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for keeping an open mind. And can I also say, I welcome all the Londoners of goodwill will welcome your trip to Auschwitz and can commend you for all the work you're doing to combat the scourge of anti-Semitism in our capital. Thank you. Well done.
Thank you. Next question in the name of Assembly Member Whittle.
Thank you, Chair. The Prime Minister fought a leadership campaign and then a general election campaign on a promise to increase police officer numbers. So far, the government's not followed through on these promises by neither giving police forces the extra money they need or even telling forces how much money they'll have to pay for these. Officers. The government's announced recruitment targets for police forces for 6,000 new officers by 2020-21. They were allocated according to each force's proportion of central government's core grant, with the Met being given a target of 1,369 officers, which is about 2/3 of the 2,000 officers from the first tranche that the Commissioner and I argued for. These additional 1,369 officers will be on top of the 1,300 officers we're paying for from City Hall. The 2021 funding allocation to pay for this recruitment has still not been announced by the government. This creates significant uncertainty as forces plan their budgets. We've also not been given the timescales for the allocation of the remaining 14,000 of the 20,000 officers, which means it's really challenging. We'll carry on lobbying the government and working with them to get the right number of officers we need. In the first instance, we need to know the amount of money we're going to get for the 1,369 officers, and then to make progress in years 2 and 3 as well going forward.
I think so. Mr. When this finally happens, Mr. Mayor, you're talking about what, 37,000 policemen?
In an ideal scenario, don't forget there's lots of ifs and buts before we get there. But if everything was to pan out as we would hope, that's the figure we're talking about. It's some years off. That's the figure we're talking about.
The reason I ask is obviously that's great, but it seems to me that one of the reasons that there is, as Assembly members already pointed out, such a lack of confidence at the moment in the police, is their total lack of visibility to most people. Now, in the last mayoral campaign, 2016, I'm sure you said, along with everyone else, maybe with the exception of the Greens, that basically we need what used to be called Bobbies on the beat. We need neighbourhood policing. This has been the case actually going back over lots of elections. It's not just your one. It never seems to happen, Mr. Mayor. It never seems to happen. They are just simply invisible. And I don't think that's just, and I wonder whether you would comment on this, I don't think that's just because of a lack of numbers. It seems to be the ethos has changed from being protective to being reactive. Do you recognise that picture?
I do. Can I just address very briefly your point? So last year, to give the police their dues, they had fewer than 30,000 officers. They had 29,000 odd officers. New York, smaller population than London, has more than 37,000 officers. So it's hardly surprising that in some parts of London people didn't see a police officer. But you're right to raise a second point in your question, which is even if we've got the officers, we want most of them to be on the streets, making us feel safer as well as being safer. In the past, there's been a criticism that police officers are driving around not being seen. I think that's unfair with the police officers we've got now. There are just so few of them. They're under-resourced, overstretched. They do try and get about in the communities. We've doubled the amount of dedicated ward officers from 1 to 2. It's still not enough. You'll remember there used to be 6 per ward, 1 sergeant, 2 officers, 3 CSOs. We're trying to increase that. With more officers, we can increase more bobbies on the beat.
I think that this was a decision that was made, I think possibly a couple of decades ago, this whole idea of taking them off the street. Any mayor of London is in a perfect position to maybe say, actually, wait a minute, we've got to reverse this policy generally.
I think, to be fair, the first mayor of London did do that with the Commissioner Ian Blair. I think we've got to remember the history accurately. Massively increased police officer numbers during the Labour government and Ken Livingston's first term as mayor. It's a fact. There used to be the neighbourhood ward officers were an innovation of the first mayor. That's now reduced at the end of the last mayoralty to just 1 officer at 1 CSO. I promised to double the amount of dedicated ward officers. We've done that. I did that at the end of my first year. The problem is there are so few officers. That leads to increased extractions from wards as well, and so we need to get more officers in London.
I do think, though, it is a matter of actually the approach more than maybe the numbers, Mr. Mayor, but thank you anyway for your question.
Oh, thank you. Can I hand over to my deputy?
The question from Assembly Member Arnold relates to school exclusions.
School exclusions have steadily increased over the last 5 years across the UK. Nearly 1,000 children were excluded from secondary schools in 2017-18, and a further 24,000 secondary pupils had more than 1 fixed period exclusion. The correlation between school exclusions and serious violence affecting young people, including the county lines phenomenon, is increasingly clear. And that's why I'm investing through the London VRU, Violence Reduction Unit, £4.7 million to support the difficult transition from primary to secondary school and to encourage inclusive and nurturing education. Starting this month, schools in 16 priority London boroughs will participate in this supported inclusive schools programme, which consists of 3 individual projects, all tried and tested. Nurturing London will be delivered by Nurture UK, who have 50 years experience with proven results and an approach that led to an 81% drop in exclusions and a subsequent 48% reduction in violence across Glasgow. The Stepping Stones project will support vulnerable children to successfully transition from primary to secondary school, and the whole school approach to healthy relationships delivered by arts charity Tender will help to tackle gender-based sexual violence. I'll also be invested in 5 projects launching this month, which will work in a trauma-informed way to improve young people's life chances. We know violent incidents involving young people aged 10 to 16 are more likely to happen at the end of the school day, so I'm also providing more after-school support for young people. But a culture shift is needed. We need urgent action from government and greater powers and responsibilities over all schools' exclusions for local authorities. Schools and teachers must be better supported, the practice of off-rolling must be outlawed, and the funding pressures on our schools must be urgently addressed, with government cuts to school budgets and after-school clubs immediately reversed as a matter of priority.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that answer. Now, earlier you reminded us of the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. And from what you've said, you're playing your part. So the first part of my follow-up is the wider London community doing enough to care and nurture its most vulnerable children? And are they aware enough about the sort of system-wide drivers which it seems to be making inclusion just harder and harder?
That's a really good question. I think by themselves, they probably think they are, but it's been too fragmented. There's been no joining of the dots.
Mm-hmm.
We've got council leaders who've got no idea the number of children excluded in their boroughs.
Yeah.
No idea.
Yeah.
They know about them because they see them in their shopping centres or in street corners or
Yeah.
getting up to mischief, inverted commas. And so what the VRU has been doing, and Lib's done a great job as the director, is bringing groups together, sharing information, sharing data. Often they're the same children that social services know, schools know, PRUs know, the police know, the council know, but they're not talking to each other. And so we started to make some progress, and there is a real appetite to work together. And that's why I genuinely welcome the Prime Minister's announcement this week to chair himself this task force, because we need to make sure all levels of government are also joined up as well.
Well, from our experience as the Mayor, we spend a lot of time focusing on his many faults, but we do know that one aspect of his persona is his care for children. So I do hope that you'll be able to work with him on this important area. Do you share my despair at the findings from the recent Evening Standard campaign that identifies the rise in school exclusions linked to the soaring numbers of young vulnerable children being recruited by criminals and being used as part of their county lines traffic system?
Absolutely.
Drug traffic system.
I've been talking about this for some time now, and I was criticised for talking about exclusions. There is a clear link between the levels of serious youth violence and excluded children. I mean, I've met offenders, ex-offenders, and I asked the question, how many of you were excluded from school? Nearly all the hands go up. And what's really important is we support schools in relation to keeping children within schools. Often teachers at the end of their tether. A child will come to school and will play up and will act in a way that's unacceptable, will cause disruption, and then often a teacher has no choice but to remove the child from the classroom and to exclude the child. Because there's not the time, effort and resources to ask the question, why is that child playing up? Has that child been affected by trauma the night before? Has that child seen mum being the victim of domestic abuse or big brother being stabbed and they're playing up at school? Is there something else going on? And good schools with the right resources are keeping children in the schools, which is leading to real benefits all around. So we're supporting projects to keep children in schools who may be at risk of exclusion. We're supporting those children at year 7 who make the transition from primary to secondary school who could, fall foul of a path that we don't like. But also we're providing facilities in school and outside school to give these children an alternative to the life of crime we are talking about, and also to the chaos that can come with joining a criminal gang. So it's really important we work with the schools. I make this point though, it's really difficult when some schools are under local management, some are academies, some are free schools, some are faith schools. I'm not criticising any of them. And that's why we need this sort of teamwork for us to work together to address this issue.
Yes, thank you. It's such a complex issue, and thank you for all that you're doing. I haven't got time because I would want to touch on the shameful situation regarding our young vulnerable children with SEND, who in terms of the exclusion rate are disproportionately represented. And I cannot get my head round how you can exclude a child in primary school. I just don't understand that. So there's so much work to be done. And I do hope that you will keep this work stream going. Thank you.
I intend to. Thank you, Chair.
Next question is from Assemblymember Bailey and relates to Hate Crime Hub.
Thank you, Chair. We're taking a zero-tolerance approach to hate crime in London, and the pioneering and innovative Hate Crime Hub is supporting victims and helping us to respond to the growing threat that London's diverse and minority communities are facing both on and offline. The Hate Crime Hub, which has the full support of community groups such as CST and Tell Mama, has already dealt with 2,242 online cases, as well as providing wider support to boroughs on other hate crime incidents. And has helped us to build strong partnerships between the Met, voluntary sector organisations and social media companies to identify online hate, get it removed, and where appropriate, ensure users are blocked. The police have my full support in enforcing the law against anybody who commits a hate crime. I am concerned that the level of successful prosecutions has been relatively low. I'm told this is because it can be difficult for investigators to obtain information from social media companies, and the CPS has a high threshold for online hate. Ultimately, the priority when dealing with hate crimes must be the victims. It's critical that we ensure everyone who experiences a traumatic incident receives the support they need. During the pilot stage alone, which ran up until May 2019, the team provided support and advice in 711 cases. In some situations, victims don't wish to see a prosecution because they want to move on from the traumatic experience. The preferred outcome can be to ensure that hateful content is removed and support provided. This must be respected, but my view is that the whole of the justice system must get better at giving victims the support they need to ensure offences are prosecuted wherever possible. In London, we've recently doubled the funding for advocacy services, enabling support for around 900 victims through the criminal justice system. I'll never apologise, Chair, for making tackling hate crime a priority or for investing in innovative ways to tackle it and support victims. This is a growing challenge in our society, and I'll continue to do all I can to address it.
Thank you for your answer, Mr. Mayor. I think we can all agree it's a growing challenge. I just want to focus on the amount of convictions. Given that there's been less than 1% of referrals resulting in any kind of charge, what work can be done to lift up that end of the work? Because clearly that sends a message to the street that it will not be tolerated by the legal system as well, which is also a big deterrent.
Absolutely. I think you're right to raise the issue of deterrence, and there is a role in relation to prosecutions for deterrence. So the Met Police are talking to the CPS in relation to, I mentioned the threshold in my answer, chances of success in a conviction and public interest, and there's a concern about whether the CPS are applying the test properly, and so and I don't mean that in a critical way, but genuinely, because it's a new area of crime being pursued by the police and the CPS. The second issue is often victims don't want to bring a prosecution. Well, can they be explained the importance of the deterrence of prosecution? So if a victim says, look, I just want it removed, can a conversation be had saying, look, that's fine, we'll do that, but if we bring a prosecution, that could lead to that person being punished, but also deterring others from doing the same. Those conversations are quite important. And the third point is, can prosecutions be brought even if the victim doesn't want to bring one? You'll be aware of the innovations in other areas of criminality, domestic abuse being the best example. Even though a victim, for good reasons, doesn't want to pursue it, of domestic abuse, prosecutions can still be brought with other forms of evidence, whether it's body-worn videos or whether it's a statement from the complainant/victim. So those things are being looked at. I just make one final point. This is a new developing area, and so I'm not for one second complacent, but I think we are doing new things that the rest of the country is not seeing, and that's why I suspect we'll see some issues going forward, but I'm hoping to see more prosecutions if there continues to be an increase in hate crime.
Yeah, because it leads me on to my second point, which is about, physical attacks on people from the LGBT community. We've had a 51% rise in the last 2 years since you've been mayor, and there is clearly a link here. I accept that the first part is new in it, and doing some work that will help. What can be done to really focus on that, because it's causing a serious amount of terror. I've spoken to a lot of people who are now talking about repeat attacks, being attacked by the same person more than once or suffering twice, different people involved. Where are the police and your office on helping this situation be reversed?
Sure. Well, Chair, first, I'm sure it's just an error in the question, because the questioner just referred to my time as mayor in relation to the increase in homophobic attacks. I'm sure he meant to say the increase has been happening since 2012. It's just an error on his part.
No.
Because the figures we have...
Well, the figures I have are different. It's not an error on my part.
Well, one of us wants to make a party political point. The other one wants to deal with the issue of hate crime. The figures that I have shows that homophobic hate crime offences has been going up since 2012. In fact, the huge increase happened in 2014 and 2015, and it's still continuing to go up. So there's a number of things we are doing to deal with the issue of hate crime. Firstly, we've got to deal with it at an early age. So I support, for example, the teaching in schools about relationships. It's really important. Children are told that families come in different shapes and sizes. That also means calling out politicians when they use homophobic language. Really important to do so, whether they're a party leader or anybody else as well, because that normalises homophobic languages and can often confirm a caricature and a prejudice in the mind of a homophobe, which is really important to deal with. The third key issue is to make sure we deal with the issue of online hate crime, which can often be people having the confidence to say things online they would never dream of saying face-to-face. That can lead to, in the spectrum, the increase in physical violence that we see. And that's one of the reasons why I've supported the issue of tackling online crime, but also made sure that I've said there'll be zero tolerance of hate crime whilst I'm the mayor. And that leads to the final part of the jigsaw, which is giving the police the resources they need, but lobbying the government to make sure legislation can be changed, but also the CPS and courts giving the support they need to bring prosecutions as well.
Thank you. To be clear, I'm not making a party political point, but it is a fact that we've had a steep rise since you've been mayor. And yes, you are right, even if a leader speaks in a very sharp racist tone, that needs to be addressed as well, including things like anti-Semitism and racism as well. I bring the point because I've been speaking to a lot of people from the LGBT community and the black community as well who feel that London is unsafe. It is your job, according to you, your number one job, to look after London's safety, and that hasn't been happening, and that's why I asked the question.
Well, Chair, can I respond to that 3-minute question?
Yes, you can.
Right. Well, Chair, I've got the figures for hate crime offences, anti-Semitic offences, disability hate crime offences, faith hate crime offences, homophobic hate crime offences, Islamophobic offences, racist and religious hate crime offences, transgender hate crime offences. And my figures don't just go back to May 2016, which for some reason I can't understand, the Assembly member seeks to be going back to just that date. My figures go back to 2012, which is when the first time these figures were properly collated in the form we have. And my figures show, Chair, that in this great city of ours, over the last 8 years, we've seen an increase in all these areas of crime over the last 8 years. I'm disappointed that on a matter as important as this, the Assembly member wants to make a party political point out of this. I think it's far more important than that. And that's why it's really important we work together to tackle this issue. As long as I'm the mayor, I'll continue to tackle it.
Okay. Thank you for that information, Mayor. And I definitely heard the member say he was not making a party political comment. No, I heard him say
Sure, that's like saying with respect and being disrespectful.
I can only say what I heard. I can only say what I've heard. Assembly Member Bailey, you weren't named, so...
Let me just make a point. We are...
Sorry, is that a question, Chair?
No.
I was given a piece of information. I'd just like to provide some back.
Just give me a question to the stats that you
I'll
just
ask the question then. Are we not, in Mayor's question time, with you talking about your mayoralty? Yes or no?
Well, you've answered your question.
Well, that's
as
why
well.
I asked the questions. I wasn't making a party political point.
Okay.
I said we are talking about you and your mayoralty and your record of delivery or not.
Okay.
Nobody else's.
Okay.
Nobody else's.
We were doing so well. So
Thank you very much.
You put your question and answered it, so that's fine.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Let's then move on to a question from Assembly Member McCartney. Disnall, office to residential conversions.
Chair, I'm sure it looked better when you practiced in the mirror this morning. Let's deal with the next question. Yes, Chair, I've been clear that these permitted development rights should either be devolved to London or scrapped. Creating substandard housing is not the answer to the housing crisis. If the government refuses to see sense and these permitted development rights to continue, London needs to be able to ensure that the homes they deliver meet the housing standards in my London plan. Not having enough living space has a negative impact on people's health and quality of life and on children's social and emotional development. Minimum space standards are critical to improving Londoners' health and well-being, but they also provide other advantages, such as making homes easier to adapt to changing needs over time. These space standards, which are set out in the London Plan, are not required under permitted development rights. And because these developments are not subject to planning policy requirements, schemes coming through this route are not required to deliver affordable housing or other requirements crucial to good growth, such as outdoor space and children's play space. Office to residential permitted development rights have not only led to extremely poor quality housing, they've also eroded the stock of viable occupied offices in the capital. It's a lose-lose situation. The government's own planning inspectors have grappled with this issue, having to allow schemes that do not offer a positive living environment because the way these rights work means that fundamental considerations, such as whether homes have windows, adequate ventilation, or meet minimum space standards, cannot be taken into account.
Thank you for that answer. And you've been very firm on that throughout the time you've been mayor. But this was thrown into stark relief for me recently when an application in Wood Green to convert an old office building, Alexandra House, was made by a private developer. It was to turn it into 219 rabbit hutch homes that your own planning advisor called dismal. And some of these appeared to be no more than 13 feet by 13 feet rooms, which were meant to deal with bathing, cooking, living, and sleeping. And following this application, through its prior approval, it appeared that where the local authority could have some say on, for example, if there was, it would be affected by traffic outside, noise from nearby commercial buildings, but had no say on the quality or affordability or size of these accommodations. If the government is not going to repeal this legislation, would you argue for at least some minimum standards?
Absolutely. I mean, you've highlighted this one example in your constituency, and there are numerous examples around London of the consequences of permitted development of office blocks. As I said, we're losing the office spaces, and the quality of homes often aren't very good. By the way, I understand the intention of the ministers wasn't to create poor quality housing. They didn't get out of bed and say, you know what, let's create awful housing and lose office space. I suspect their intention was to make it easier for the transition from office to residential. What I'm trying to say to them in a respectful, courteous, non-partisan manner is, it's not worked in relation to what we're seeing. And so I want them to give councils more power, devolve more power to councils to decide this issue. One of the things that government could do very easily is to make it easier for local authorities to introduce Article 4 directions, which would make a big difference, to remove these PD rights in order to keep what they've got, but also to have the sort of minimum standards that they need, and then the councils could make sure appropriate schemes could go ahead, and those that aren't either don't go ahead or need to be amended.
Thank you. In fact, Haringey Council, when this legislation came in, did apply for an exemption for the Wood Green area because it was worried about this exact issue. And it is also against the local plan that has been agreed by councillors. And you said earlier that you want these powers devolved to yourself. Does the government seem as if they're going to be moving on that? Because obviously this application is over the threshold, whereas if it was a normal building, would be referable to you.
And one of the frustrations is it's not referral to me. I mean, as you know, schemes that are above 150 units or a certain height do come to me. What the government has done, either intentionally or unintentionally, is created a loophole. And so we will be lobbying the government to try and close this loophole. Question, was that their intention? I'm hoping it wasn't, because what it's led to is substandard housing, and I can't imagine any government minister wanting to create substandard housing.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Shoot, I'm lost. Yes, we've got two questions withdrawn. Assembly Member Copley's question, Assembly Member Boff's question. So we then go on to the next question in the name of Assembly Member Cooper, responsibility for child poverty.
Thank you, Chair. There's no excuse for child poverty in a city as prosperous as London. It's scandalous that 4 in 10 children are growing up in poverty, that 400,000 can't access an affordable healthy diet, and that tens of thousands of parents are forced to rely on food banks. I'm determined to do everything in my power to tackle child poverty in London, but the levers to truly address it lie in the hands of the government. The UN Special Rapporteur was clear in his report last year that austerity was a political choice and has increased poverty in the UK. The research we published last year supported this assessment. It showed an additional 75,000 London children will be pushed into poverty by 2022 as a result of the tax and welfare reforms of the past decade. And we're using this research to urge the government to change its policies, and will continue to do so. In particular, we're calling on them to use the upcoming budget to reverse the damaging welfare reforms, like the 2-child limit and the freeze to local housing allowance rates, which currently fall well short of average rents. We're also using the research and other arguments to persuade the government to give us our fair share in the next spending review. I'll continue to bear down on the costs for low-income families, for example, by pressing ahead with building on a record number of genuinely affordable homes, keeping transport costs down with initiatives like the Hopper, and helping families access good quality, affordable childcare. And over the next few months, I'll be exploring options for expanding our successful project with the Child Poverty Action Group, which has raised thousands of pounds of additional income for hard-pressed families by delivering welfare advice directly to parents in schools.
Given what you've just said, Mr Mayor, I assume that you were as surprised, if not shocked, to hear the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, in November 2019 saying that government policies are nothing to do with child poverty, and it's just the responsibility of local authorities and a long list of other individuals and authorities. Given that the top 20 UK authorities of which have the highest rates of child poverty, 10 of those are in London. Do you not agree that this washing of hands by a member of the government is really quite offensive?
Well, there's two big points here. Firstly, I mean, the fact that the poverty levels in London are so stark is an argument to make sure we get the resources we need in both the budget and the spending review. There is a perception in government and around the country that London's very, very wealthy. Parts are, but as you've said in your answer to your question, parts are not, and people are not. The second part is the Trust have looked at the people they help in their food banks. And their research has shown that the drivers are a number of things, from very low incomes to the benefit changes, but also to sometimes the delays in receiving the benefits. And I think the government's got to recognise the responsibility for both the benefit changes, the delays, but also sometimes low incomes are to government policy and legislation. They need to recognise that and try and address that.
So government does bear some responsibility, but with 25% of London's children projected to be hungry during school holidays and 60,000 children receiving emergency food parcels in 2019, obviously it's really important that London itself is doing as much as it can. You referred to some of the things that you've done. What more can you be doing? I mean, we've just launched London Power, for example, to try and help families reduce their energy costs. But what else are you able to do to help families who are in these desperate circumstances?
Well, a lot of things that we are doing are outside our statutory powers. We're doing them because it's the right thing to do. Some of the Assembly, you heard in answer to a previous question, criticise me and my administration for doing that. They say it's not what we should be doing. I think it is what we should be doing. Our core business must be to help Londoners and give them a helping hand. And so one of the things that we did very recently was to host, and my Deputy Mayor for Communities, Debbie Weeks-Bernard, did this, a Children's Food Insecurity Summit, bringing together experts from the third sector, community groups, charities, and the private sector to see what we can do working together, pooling our ideas and resources to take some steps going forward. Another thing we're doing is working with a number of boroughs to develop a food poverty action plan in those parts of London which has the poorest levels of, which have the poorest children and the highest levels of food poverty going forward. A number of reasons we've got for freezing fares. One of them is to help these sorts of families use public transport. You'll have seen the Hopper. Actually, the poorest Londoners tend to use buses rather than the Underground, which is why the Hopper is a game changer for many of them, particularly in outer London. The living wage, one of the reasons why I'm really proud we've more than doubled the amount of living wage employers since I've been mayor from the previous mayor, is because it means that decent Londoners who do a hard day's work can get a decent day's pay. And there's other examples of things we're doing using the Good Work Standard, using procurement, using our convening power. But the key thing is, whatever we're doing is a fraction of addressing the issues which really a government can and should be doing, because a lot of these problems are caused by government policy.
Well, I, for one, am not going to be criticising you for tackling the scourge of hungry children across our city. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much.
Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. Next is the question is Assembly Member Hall, protecting police officers.
Thank you for your question. Assaults against police officers, as well as all emergency service workers, are appalling and absolutely unacceptable. Under-resourced and overstretched police officers in London are the best in the world. Professional, skilled and dedicated to keeping us safe. In 2010, there were 33,000 police officers. Last year, there were 31,000. And they went below 30,000 for the first time in months. That means that where we used to have just over 4 police officers per 1,000 officers, there are now just over 3. This reduction in officers when the population is rising means it's more difficult to protect the public, but it's also more difficult to protect police officers themselves. I've taken advice on how best to protect police officers from the Metropolitan Police Commissioner and her senior team, and I support her operational decision making to ensure officers have the tools they need to keep themselves and the public safe. Following a successful trial in custody suites, the Commissioner provided spit and bite guards to all frontline officers. Other safety equipment being provided to officers include new, more reliable batons and PAVA incapacitant spray that's safer to use. The Commissioner also asked for funding to increase the provision of tasers, and we've provided this, invested an additional £1 million. There are now more than 2,000 additional officers trained in how to use tasers since I became mayor. When I became mayor, there were 4,100 officers armed with tasers, and now that stands at 6,467, rising to 6,800 in the next few weeks. The Commissioner said she would expect there to be about 10,000 in the next couple of years trained in taser. We've also overseen the biggest ever rollout of body-worn video, ensuring that when officers are attacked, evidence is captured to help bring those criminals to justice. I can assure Londoners that I'll continue to work very closely with the Commissioner and her team to ensure officers have all the tools they need to keep themselves and the public safe, whilst balancing this with proper transparency and accountability.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I appreciate that. I know I bang on about police officer safety, but it really does matter so much. And at that point, I'd like to say, thank goodness Stuart Alton was okay. What an incredible officer. It came on the news yesterday. Thank goodness he had a taser, because he was able to keep himself safe. So I'm sure all my colleagues would say very well done to him. Mr. Mayor, on Monday, the government opened bidding for police and crime commissioners to get funding for more tasers. Are you going to bid for that?
Yeah, just to say, the announcement, what I refer to my answer in relation to the tasers, is funding from City Hall, but we're talking to the Home Office about additional funding for tasers, because the government's announced this scheme for all 43 forces. We want to make sure we get sufficient monies for tasers for London as well.
Good. One of my concerns, and I have brought it up at other committees, is that if we have, please God, lots more police officers around, and there are more and more of them with tasers, where are we going to keep those tasers? Because we're selling an awful lot of the police stations or the police homes, as it were, and you can't just leave tasers hanging around.
Can I say, I don't know which patronising, we had a really good quality debate at the Budget and Performance Committee on these sorts of issues, and for those watching and thinking it's always knockabout, it isn't. We have proper discussions and debates and ideas on these issues. At that committee, you raised and others raised a serious issue about the support officers need for them to be functioning, and so of course we welcome 20,000 officers over the next 3 years. We hope we get 6,000 in London. That means additional support they will need from a variety of issues. So what we've done is pause all sale of any estate the Met Police Service have to consider what needs we have. A slight difficulty is we're not sure how many officers we'll receive after the 3 years. So the sooner we know, the sooner we can plan. And they range from small issues like, in terms of space, where tasers are stored, to things like where officers can have a break and refresh, and to things like lockers, to computers are stored. So these are some of the things that the MPS Estates is looking at, working with MOPAC, but also in consultation with the government. The sooner we get certainty from the government, the sooner we can make these plans. But I can assure you, the MPS and MOPAC are working closely together to make sure we don't inadvertently have a situation where we have additional police officers, but not the support they need to be properly functioning.
Okay. Very quickly, if I may, we don't always agree, and we did have quite a battle on the spit guards, but I'm glad to see and to say that eventually it was agreed. Now, it was agreed, I think, about a year ago. I have stopped police officers in the street that I know, and some that I haven't, and I've asked them about spit guards, and so many of them haven't got them. Now, can you give me a date by which time all frontline officers have spit guards in order to protect themselves?
I can, Chair, but I'm just smiling because I can imagine I remember stopping a police officer and asking if they've got a...
I do. I actually do.
It's quite a conversation. No, I'm sure you do. I'm trying to imagine the conversation. I'm just picturing it, that's all.
Yeah.
So I've got that answer, which is over 12,000 officers are trained in the use of spit and bite guards so far. The intention is for all officers to be trained by April 2020, and officers to be given this. They're quite small, they're quite easy to have on.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Next question is in the name of Assembly Member Devonish, London's bus network.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I am. Londoners expect buses to run on time, to run safely, cleanly, efficiently, and to remain affordable. I've started a long overdue modernisation of the entire bus network to achieve this. Last year, I introduced 6 new bus routes in outer London, the largest increase for years. Just last month, I introduced a package of enhancements and new routes in West London. These changes are part of a plan to grow outer London services by 5 million kilometres over the next 5 years, making it easier for people to travel sustainably. Changes to the way Londoners are living and travelling, and investments in other forms of transport, such as London Overground and the Tube, as well as the increased levels of cycling, have meant that less people want to travel by bus in central London. So in some cases, to put it simply, there were too many buses on the road. Every penny spent on buses running half empty could be better spent on improving services in parts of London where demand is growing. London's bus network changes reflect new patterns of travel They provide links to new housing developments in Outer London, reduce bus and bus congestion in Central London, and improve reliability. Reliability is now at its best since records began some 40 years ago. I've also made transport more affordable for Londoners. I've frozen fares and maintained bus fares at £1.50. In 2016, I also introduced the hopper fare, allowing unlimited changes within an hour of fares touching in. It has been used in nearly 450 million journeys so far, with an estimated 450,000 hops made each day. I've got a longer answer, but I want to give this a chance to ask supplementary questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to particularly focus on our senior citizens and the disabled, and I'm indebted to my constituent, Mrs. Sue Kay, who writes to me literally every month on this and really passionately cares. Do you recognise that when you've made the changes to the bus network, you have made it more difficult for people like Sue to actually get buses? They can't use the tube. They have issues with going down large escalators. They have to use buses. And if you're cutting the frequency of a number of routes, that gives real concern. And do you believe that when TfL look at these changes, they're always looking at the DDA implications?
So which bus does she use?
She uses a number of buses, all from Westminster North down to mainly the West End.
Sure. So I'm really happy to look at offline the particular buses that she uses, but can I just reassure you that before any bus service changes are made, they're subject to an equality impact assessment, and that looks at some of the issues that your constituent would deal with. So you can reassure her that those assessments do take place, but I'm more than happy if the case is raised with either the Deputy Mayor for Transport or myself to look into the particular circumstances.
Thank you very much. We'll definitely do that.
Okay, next question is the name of Assembly Member Dismore, Grenfell-style aluminium composite material cladding.
Thank you, Chair. Since the tragedy at Grenfell, I've repeatedly called on the Government to fund cladding remediation. It took nearly a year for them to commit to providing funding for councils and housing associations, and private sector leaseholders had to wait yet another year. These delays have placed Londoners at risk. Of the 66 social sector blocks eligible for funding, 5 have claimed their completion payment. These 5 buildings include roughly 500 homes. A further 31 blocks, just over 2,000 homes, are projected to complete by the end of June this year. Even in the social sector, where landlords have been proactive, remediation takes time. Shamefully, though, private building owners have failed to act with the same urgency. The vast majority of the 58 London buildings eligible under the private sector fund are still yet to start remediation, and only 1 has completed. Contained within these 57 buildings are approximately 4,000 individual homes. The pace of remediation is dictated by the building owner, but my GLA building safety team is working hard to try and speed up the process, including putting pressure on applicants and proposing to the government ways to streamline the funding process. Whilst it's unacceptable that Londoners are still living in buildings with unsafe AC and cladding, every building under the fund has interim safety measures in place. The bad news is that leaseholders are footing the bill for these interim safety measures because the fund doesn't cover them. What's more, there are an unknown number of London tower blocks with other types of unsafe cladding. These blocks have no routes to remediation, and the recent fire in Bolton should be a stark warning to the government. And that's why just before Christmas, the Homes for Londoners Board, which I chair, wrote to the Secretary of State to urge him to widen the scope of the funds to include interim measures and the types of unsafe cladding share. I should say this. I want to thank Senator Dismore for his continued scrutiny of building safety in London, along with others across the sector. I'll continue to call on the government to wake up to the scale of this crisis.
Well, thank you for that. If the rate of remediation over the last 6 months continues, on figures published today, it will take 5 years just for social housing to be completed and 9 years for the private sector tall buildings to be made safe. What else could be done to speed this up? And as you've mentioned, what will be the consequences when testing confirms other types of cladding or installation apart from AC and the dangerous, and that other less tall blocks of flats are shown to be at risk, bearing in mind the recent fires in low-rise buildings both in London and elsewhere?
Well, it's a really important question. So all we're talking about is AC and cladding. There are other forms of cladding that we know are combustible that aren't being dealt with, and we haven't tested other forms of cladding and other buildings which could also have combustible materials in them. And you're right to talk about the potential delay in these buildings being remediated. A number of things we're doing is how can we make sure that the supply chain issues are dealt with. Government has been told about these challenges. The complexity of designing the remediation works, the complexity of completing the remediation works, the difficulties in getting the right teams available to deal with these issues. We're talking with MHCLG about streamlining the process, but also the big challenge we've got is to identify other types of unsafe cladding as well, and that's one of the reasons why Homes for Londoners wrote to the government before Christmas to make sure they were aware of our concerns, by the which are replicated around the country as well.
Well, the government is refusing to provide detailed figures about buildings with cladding on the grounds that they claim of what they perceive as a safety risk. It isn't the real safety risk that people may be unknowingly living in unsafe homes. Shouldn't residents in potentially dangerous homes know about the risks rather than be kept in the dark by a Conservative government that's dragged its feet, failed to meet its own remediation targets and promises, and thus has allowed the cladding scandal to drag on for 2.5 years so far, leaving an unknown number of flat dwellers living in danger for years ahead? Do you think the government's concern over safety rings rather hollow in the light of this lack of transparency?
Well, I'm really concerned about the delay from the government and the lacklustre approach from the government to this really important issue. One of the reasons why you've now got teams who go to fires from the LFB who are not just dealing with putting the fire out but also evacuation is the concern about whether a building is safe and whether the staple advice can be used. I do have some sympathy with the government's approach though, because what they don't want to do is spread panic and alarm, and what they don't want to do is to cause a situation where people lead to behavioural changes that could put their lives at risk and also others in their buildings. So I sort of understand one of their concerns. I'm hoping it's been done for the right reasons rather than the reasons you're alluding to and stuff. We'll continue to talk to the government, see if we can provide more information so there's more knowledge. Just the reassurance that we know there is there are interim measures in place in some of these buildings to make sure that they are as safe as they can be in the absence of remediation of the ACM cladding.
Well, the GLA now states that it can't provide me with updates on the cladding remediation fund, which is administered by City Hall on behalf of the government, because of a memorandum of understanding between the GLA and MHCLG. So this means we can't know which building owners are in receipt of public money and how much is being paid out. Don't you think this is government secrecy being obstructive, unnecessary and unfair to both the taxpayer and to residents potentially at risk?
One of the things that I think we can explore is, notwithstanding the conditions upon which the government made the agreement with us to administer the fund for them, whether there's some way of Assembly members being made aware, subject to suitable undertakings. And so what I suggest we do is carry on talking about whether we can persuade the government to do that. I say this, giving the government the benefit of the doubt. I understand their nervousness about making public this information. We're going to carry on talking to the government and talking to you about how we can let at least Assembly members know whether there are issues that affect their constituents and stuff, and we'll carry on talking to the government to see if we can persuade them to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Next question, in the name of Assembly Member Shah, Transport for London Business Plan.
Thank you, Chair. Transport for London published its updated business plan in December. The business plan sets out how transport will support sustainable growth, make the city a safer, greener and better place to live, work and visit. Over the course of the next 5 years, capacity on the District, Circle, Hammersmith and City and Metropolitan lines will increase by 33% after the completion of a major signalling upgrade programme, and a new state-of-the-art trains will be introduced on the Piccadilly line. New walk-through trains will be introduced on the DLR, and the introduction of services in both the Northern Line extension and the London Overground Barking Riverside extension will improve connectivity for Londoners in all parts of the city. TfL will continue to invest in making London's transport offer greener and our cities healthier. We already have the largest fleet of electric buses in Europe, and by the end of 24-25, there will be more than 2,000 zero-emission buses in the fleet. The tightening of the low-emission zone later this year and the expansion of ULEZ next year are key to tackling London's toxic air crisis. Significant healthy streets investments will ensure that the amount of protected cycle space would have trebled since I became mayor, and 41 of London's most dangerous junctions will have been made safer by May. All London buses, apart from the heritage route masters, are fully accessible, as are 95% of bus stops. Step-free access will open at Mill Hill East Station this month, the next in a programme of station accessibility improvements, bringing the total of step-free stations of the Underground to 79. However, for London to continue to grow and for transport infrastructure to meet the capital's future needs, we need support and certainty of long-term funding from central government. TfL's funding, as you're aware, from central government has been reduced by an average of £700 million a year. It's only through steady and sustained investment that we can plan for a productive, dynamic and more prosperous future.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Between 2017 and 18, and then 2018 and 19, from the figures we have, we've seen the cost of 60 plus Oyster photocard go up by 31 million. Can you explain the reason for this 45% increase?
Yeah, the short reason is because the Freedom Pass doesn't just apply to those who receive the state pension, because the state pension eligibility has been going up year on year, whereas the Freedom Pass applies to those who are 60 plus. And we fund the difference, if you like. And each year that gap becomes bigger. One of the options is to say we'll only pay the Freedom Pass to those who get the state pension. I'm not willing to do that. I will continue to pay the Freedom Pass, make sure with council support, we pay the Freedom Pass to all those who are 60 plus. And so that's the explanation. And each year, I'm afraid, it's going to go upwards as there's a bigger gap between the state pension and those who are 60 plus.
Thank you. Looking at 2018 business plan, it showed 2,034 million bus passengers, whilst 2019 business plan shows 2,184 million bus passengers. Can you explain how TfL have managed to increase bus patronage by 150 million?
Well, it's by making our buses more reliable. And one of the things that we've done is we realise that there are a number of options in central London why people aren't using buses. Bus patronage has gone down. By the way, it's gone down far more rapidly around the country. One of the reasons why it's less so in London is because of my policy to freeze fares and the hopper as well. And so there's other choices in central London. In outer London, there are less choices. And so we're moving the buses, more buses in outer London as well. But also, one of the reasons why people don't use a bus is because it's not reliable. And so from simple things like making sure utility companies aren't digging up roads, to providing better information so buses are more punctual and speeding up reliability, that's leading to more confidence. And so over the next 5 years, as I explained in my answer to a previous question, we'll be increasing buses in outer London, and hopefully that will lead to the dip being reversed in relation to passenger numbers going down. But I suspect people's working habits have now changed, people's leisure activities have now changed, so we can't assume that bus patronage will go back up again.
I note that your response about outer London in this instance, and also reply to Assembly Member Devanish's question on outer London buses as well. I know that a lot of review is taking place on a borough by borough basis in outer London, but is there any chance that you would have a more comprehensive review of all outer London bus services, like what was done for inner London? Is that in the long term possible?
Yeah, it is.
Practical?
It is. One of the things that you will know, bearing in mind the constituency you represent, is often bus journeys in outer London are from town centre to town centre, or home to hospital, or new housing developments to leisure. They don't even come to central London. And so we're looking at the journeys there are that people make. So you'll be aware, we, for example, also piloted some new modes of bus usage using an app in I think West London and South London as well. So we are being innovative in relation to services going forward, but being conscious of the fact that bus passenger usage and patterns are different in outer London than they have traditionally been in central London with journeys. People don't just go from outer to inner, they go within different parts of outer London. So we are looking at that.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay, follow-up questions from Assembly Member Hall?
Sorry?
Did you have a follow-up question on this item? No?
No,
Okay. Assembly Member Boff?
Mr. Mayor, you've postponed signalling on the Piccadilly line, you've screwed up the Crossrail, Crossrail, and Londoners are yet to be persuaded that any of the changes you've done on the bus network have benefited them. Every other project you appear to have inherited from your predecessor, and basically not getting the kind of progress that's required. Londoners want to know what on earth you've done over the past 3.5 years. What have you done, Mr. Mayor?
Well, in relation to transport, a number of things that we have done. The most important thing that Londoners appreciate is us freezing TfL fares. So the average household in London will benefit to the tune of £200 because of the TfL fares freeze. Linked with that, of course, is the fact that we've introduced the unlimited hopper bus fare, which means that Londoners can travel on a bus within an hour and change as many times as they like for the same price of £1.50. So in outer London, it's been a real game changer, particularly for the poorest Londoners. The other big thing, of course, we've done since I became mayor is invest record sums in walking and cycling. The ambition is to have 80% of Londoners walking and cycling using public transport. The good news is, in my first 3 years as mayor, not only have I increased the amount of segregated cycle lanes in London, I've more than doubled it. And in 3.5 years, I've achieved more segregated cycle lanes than the previous mayor did in 8 years. And we're also inherited a situation where there were so many dangerous junctions in London. We've made more and more safe. By my end of my first term as mayor, 41 of the junctions identified as dangerous will have been made safer. The other big thing we're doing in London, because of my transport policies, is addressing the air quality issue in London. The previous mayor, who you're a big fan of, I know, had a situation where he buried away reports in relation to the poor quality air in London, which showed that the poorest Londoners live in parts of London with the worst air, including schools. I published that report, but also have a plan to address that. King's College London did a report that said, under the policies of the previous mayor, it has taken 193 years to bring the air within legal limits. Using my policies, it will take 6 years, and some of those policies are bringing in the ULEZ last year, opposed by the Conservatives, but I did it in the face of their opposition. Evidence shows that because of the ULEZ being brought in 2019, the amount of NOx has been reduced by 1/3, the amount of particulate matter by 13%, which is why I'm rolling it out to the rest of London this year for bigger vehicles, going up to 2021 for other vehicles, up to the North Circular and South Circular. The evidence is that will lead to massive change in the improvement of quality of air, but transport is only responsible for half of the dangerous air in London. Housing, construction and the River Thames are responsible for the other half, so we need to take action there. The other big thing I've done since I became mayor is in relation to taxis. The previous mayor was given licences to diesel taxis, responsible for a large amount of the bad quality air in London. 0 electric taxis when I became mayor, more than 3,000 since I've been mayor, but also we've changed the policy of the previous mayor who didn't give enough support to taxi drivers moving away, either decommissioning or moving to electric. The other big thing we've done...
No, I'm going to stop you there, Mayor.
Oh, I can go on about our policies.
Your rambling
Chair, the question was...
Mr Mayor, means I've got a minute more than I would have had otherwise.
No, the Conservative group are out of time.
Oh, it's a shame.
Can I ask the Assembly to agree to suspend Standing Order 2.98 in order to get the last 2 questions in and for some important statutory stuff that we've got to do? Yes? No. Thank you. Let's have the question from Assembly Member Cooper, ULEZ success.
Well, Chair, can I say that's this really important question? Had we taken the advice of the Conservatives, the ULEZ wouldn't have been introduced in April 2019, and the huge progress we've made wouldn't have been seen. We've seen, since the ULEZ has been introduced, a reduction of the nitrogen dioxide, nitrogen oxide by 1/3. We've seen a reduction of particulate matters by 13%. We've also seen huge progress made cleaning the air across our city. And it's worth reminding ourselves why it's so important. The bad quality air in London is responsible for thousands of premature deaths. It is responsible for children to have stunted lungs, permanently stunted, but also to adults to suffer from a whole host of health issues, from asthma to dementia to cancer. Because of our bold policies, action has been taken to address that. We're also taking policies to clean up the taxi fleet and the bus fleet as well. Had we accepted Conservative plans in the budget, we wouldn't be able to do so. So we've made huge progress in relation to that. But the big game changer is also going to come in when we roll these out to the North Circular and South Circular from next year, and this year for other vehicles like coaches, buses in the rest of London, which will see big progress being made. And it's really important that Londoners appreciate that now, when you look at the Royal Society of Public Health, when they talk about the biggest achievements of the 21st century, the ULEZ is ranked 7, which demonstrates the difference a Labour mayor can make, and yet another reason why you mustn't vote for the Conservative on May the 7th this year.
As you know, Mr Mayor, I've pressed you to bring it even further forward to January 2019, so I was a very strong supporter of the initiative to move it forward. But obviously, as you've said, you know, we sat in this very chamber and listened to the Conservative group pressing very hard for it to only be implemented in October 2020, as was originally announced in 2015. And I just want to be absolutely crystal clear. There is no chance at all that you are going to listen to those people who say that expanding ULEZ should not occur. You are definitely going ahead with expanding ULEZ in October 2020.
Well, the problem is I inherited a blank sheet of paper. There was no details, no planned workings, no calculations made, no work done, so we started from scratch basically. And that's why it's quite remarkable that we've gone from a standing still position to what we achieved in April 2019 and the progress we've made. I've asked the question, can we go even faster? And the answer is no. It's a very complex scheme. It's the world's first. There's multiple delivery strands, including changes to back-end systems, new infrastructure, working with the boroughs. There's a consultation we've undertaken, but also we've got to be reasonable, particularly to low-income families, to charities, small businesses, and those who are going to change their fleet, for them to be as ready as well. We simply can't do it any faster. And you'll see over the next 100 days, some people claiming it can be faster. It can't be. The only way it can be done for 2020 for bigger vehicles and for other vehicles in October 2021 is by voting Labour on May the 7th this year. It's a two-horse race between me and the Tories who are against this, and that's why it's important to vote Labour on May the 7th.
Mr Mayor, you anticipated, I'm sure you're regularly pressed as I am, by groups who would like it to be expanded more quickly, and I understand the points that you're making about the need to implement in a thorough way.
On a point of standing order,
as part of
on
the,
a standing order,
as
Chair.
part of the,
Can you finish?
as part of the
Out of respect to
implementation
your
of the
colleague,
ULEZ,
or not?
you also introduced the ULEZ support scheme, which set aside £23 million for to be accessed by mainly small businesses, but also some charities. Now, there has been much spoken. In fact, actually, Assemblymember Curtin at the very beginning of today was talking about the devastating impact on businesses. I'm slightly disappointed that so far so little of that £23 million has been accessed by those small businesses and charities. What more can we do to make sure that people are accessing it if needed?
Okay, before you answer, Mr Mayor, there's a point of order. Will the member rise and tell me which bit of the standing order he wants to raise?
I haven't a clue, Chair, but what I do know is that one of the principles of this chamber is we don't use it for blatant electioneering. If you're not going to challenge the Mayor on his encouragement of people to vote for a particular party, then you can be absolutely assured that we will spend our time on the Assembly between now and May saying vote Conservative.
Which candidate are you backing on May the 7th?
Get Brexit done.
I bet some of you vote for me as well.
It's up to you, Chair. It's up to you, Chair, how you want to carry on this Assembly business.
Thank you. It's up to me. Can I say the standing order, which was incomplete, has been noted. Can I have an answer to the question that has just been put to the Mayor from Assemblymember Cooper?
Well, Chair, one of the things that we've been doing is to engage with businesses.
On point of order, Chair, I didn't want it to be noted. I want it to be responded to. And that means either challenge the Mayor for what he said now, or write to me with what your decision is going to be. I don't just want it noted.
Well, I will write to you that I've noted your standing order.
In which case, that's not acceptable.
Well,
in which case, this group can therefore feel it's perfectly free to go electioneering through the processes of this Assembly on every committee meeting, on every scrutiny meeting. We can tell everyone to vote Conservative and without any degree of challenge whatsoever from yourselves.
Chair,
if that's the case, then thank you for your support in telling us to go and vote, tell people to vote Conservative.
Do you know, excuse me, can I just finish with this member? I can only say again to you, Assemblymember Boff, I'm happy to put in writing my response to your incomplete point of order, and you'll get that in writing. Is this a point of order from you?
Chair, I just wondered if you could bring to a close this vote Sadiq Khan vote Conservative conversation, because you never know, there may be other people in the Assembly who haven't declared yet.
Sorry, I didn't hear what you said. Can you stand up again?
There may be other people in the Assembly who haven't declared themselves yet, you know, who may be affected by this vote Labour, vote Conservative conversation. I think we should draw that to a close.
Do you know what I can
You can join us, David.
what I can... Excuse me, members. What I can tell members is I raised this question with officers yesterday, and the Assembly and the GLA have not been notified of any candidates for a forthcoming election. So until that happens, let us get on with our business. Can I have an answer in the remaining minute to the Labour question in front of you, Mr. Mayor?
Chair, I bet just as in May
And please, no more electioneering.
just as in May 2016, there'll be Tories voting for me.
I'm not interested. We don't care. We don't care. We don't care. And you know, you've just stepped over the line, haven't you?
I've been trying my best for the last 5 minutes, to be fair.
No, you just stepped over the line and you've just wasted your the Labour members' time because it's clear you don't have an answer.
We've
to
still got
her
a minute,
question.
Chair. We've still got a minute and 11 to answer the Labour question. And the answer is that we have shown over the last few years that we are an administration that's pro-business, which means we engage with businesses and listen to their concerns. And Assembly Cooper, as somebody who's been a passionate advocate for fixing the air in London, also speaks to businesses. And one of the things about businesses is they often suffer the consequences of the poor quality air, with their drivers suffering the consequences, but also their families who live in London as well. And one of the things that we've done is to engage with not just the Federation of Small Businesses, but the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the CBI and London First to understand their concerns. And that's one of the reasons why we're now looking into how the scrappage scheme can help not just the businesses, but also low-income families as well. And we'll be announcing some changes in due course, because we understand that it's important that this support reaches those who need it the most. What I would do is ask colleagues in this chamber to please lobby the government. It is a Conservative government who have failed to give any support to our ultra-low emission zone, have refused to invest in a national diesel scrappage scheme, and who are in breach of legislation to do with the poor quality air. Another reason, Chair, to vote for Sadiq Khan, the Labour candidate, on May the 7th.
We've got one member who's waited for her question to be put. And it's in the name of Assemblymember Berry, on behalf of Assemblymember Russell.
Chair.
London Waste Mountain.
Chair, I don't know if this will come off my time or not, but I just want to say I think it has been very inappropriate, the amount of comments there have been that have included. I mean, we're all trying to
Can
put
I
across
have?
our
Can you? No.
To use the word
no.
vote,
Assemblymember Berry, please
listen
listen to the answer to your question and then do a follow-up. Can I have an answer to this question?
Thank you, Chair. My
Berry?
environment strategy clearly states our ambition to make London a zero-waste city, with no biodegradable or recyclable waste being sent to landfill by 2026, which has been recognised by C40 as being at the forefront of megacities. In London, responsibility for waste management lies with boroughs. So last year, I required every borough to produce a reduction and recycling plan. We have received drafts from all boroughs and officers who've been working to ensure they're more ambitious in looking at how to help Londoners only use what they need and reuse where they can. Food waste and single-use packaging like coffee cups and plastic bottles make up 30% of London's municipal waste. Since March 2018, I've been working to reduce single-use plastic waste by installing drinking water fountains across London and promoting the Refill London programme. We've already installed 28 drinking fountains in partnership with ZSL, and I'm now working with Thames Water to install over 100 more by April 2020. 31 of these are already available for use. The number of refill points across London has increased from 200 to over 3,500, where cafes, restaurants, etc. have signed up to offer free water refills to members of the public to encourage them to reduce their waste. For new developments, my draft London plan sets a requirement for all referable planning applications to include a circular economy statement to demonstrate how they will reduce construction waste and boost recycling. We're working through the London Waste and Recycling Board to promote waste reduction. This includes their Advanced London programme, which has supported 150 small businesses adopt circular economy business models to help cut waste. So far, this has resulted in 27 new products delivered to market and 40 new jobs created. However, waste reduction across all sectors will require action from government to create a robust policy framework to design out waste and boost resource efficiency. I've lobbied for government to take a more circular economy approach and supported the banning of single-use plastics such as drinking straws, as well as the proposed introduction of enhanced producer responsibility and deposit return schemes. I'll continue to engage with government through lobbying and responding to consultations to ensure that London's waste can be reduced as much as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't think you've mentioned that in your answer there, but I wanted to point out that London's recycling rates are creeping up at a very, very low rate, only 0.3% up last year. And at 33.4%, we're miles off your 50% target. My colleague Caroline Russell, who's not here today, recently asked all councils if they could recycle 7 common household items, including black plastic food containers, Tetra Packs, aluminium foil, crisp packets, old pens, bike tyres and plastic buckets, and the responses varied hugely from councils who couldn't recycle any of these to those who could recycle 3 or 4 at most. So no wonder we have a problem when it's so inconsistent and you can't recycle basic everyday products. When will you be demanding more powers from the new government to take control of London's waste so this can be sorted out?
Well, we've already been demanding powers from the government for a while, including most recently with the re-election of the Conservative government, and we're currently doing so.
Because it's been quite a while since your environment strategy came out. The government's strategy came out now over a year ago. Have you done any work since then to try and change they indicate they're going to bring forward some new work? Have you done any work to influence that?
Yeah, you'll be aware of the new environment bill government has talked about. And so we'll continue to lobby the government to make sure we get more powers and more resources to address this really important issue.
Okay, and so I want to move on. Because not only are we bad at recycling and not meeting our targets there, we're also burning almost 60% of the waste we produced. And I've looked into this, and I think there is a fundamental problem with our policy targets that we have. And the flaw is that we have a percentage target for recycling and a goal to not send anything to landfill by 2026, but we have no clear target to reduce the fundamental source, the arisings, as it's called, of the waste we produce. In fact, the London Plan envisages those going up over the next years, right up to 2041. So, Mr. Mayor, it's true, isn't it? We don't have an actual London-wide waste reduction target. And why don't we have one?
What's true is that we've got nowhere near the powers and resources we need. And what's needed is more support to councils to address the fact that so few of their waste is recycled, but also to give us more powers to work with councils. One of the big issues is obviously manufacturers. One of the big issues is the way packaging works. Mm-hmm. One of the big issues is the amount of residual waste that goes to incinerators. I don't think there is a need in London for more incinerators. We've got more than enough. What we need is to make sure the government works with us to address the issue of the production of some of this waste, and that's why it's really important that it's at all levels.
Yeah.
The Environment Bill provides an opportunity to change legislation. Outside the EU, there are even fewer teeth that we've got to hold the government to account, hold manufacturers to account, hold the private sector to account. And that's why it's really important that we have a sea change of attitude from the government, including the resources and government we need. We can produce policy and targets all day long without support from the government and without the resources and levers we have. It won't make a difference on the ground.
Well, I think a target is needed to underpin a lot of things we can influence at our London level. So, for example, without a target to reduce waste, things like repair cafes, support for repairing businesses, support for reuse, policies that might reduce demolition in building, for example, all of those are kind of nice to haves without the waste production target, reduction of waste production target to underpin them.
What I was getting to before,
we could set our own target if we wanted to.
What I was getting to before you asked your further question was what's key is to make sure there are the means to the end. So the target is the end. We've got no powers and resources for the means. And that's why it's really important to recognise where support is needed. So the councils, some of them we speak to, want to do the right thing. I'll give you simple examples.
I'm specifically asking about whether or not you should set a target, not what you can do to achieve it, because I think
what I'm responding to
it is important to have that target. Otherwise, we are setting ourselves effectively a target to burn, not to reduce waste.
Let me give you an example, a practical example of the problems of not having the means to bring about change or the resources. We have a recycling target of 50%. We want to reduce waste to as much as we can from previous levels. The target is there, we're nowhere near meeting the recycling targets. You mentioned the 0.3% increase in London. There is a target for recycling.
Well, I'm trying to keep you on the topic of my question because I'm trying to get to a very fundamental point here, and you seem to be just giving. Well, I want to give you an example. It's not a good way to answer a question that's really about the fundamentals of how we create targets for London and achieve things that are very important. At the moment, we seem to be working against reduction and leading towards more incineration. Given that we're not improving our recycling rates.
It's very difficult
Okay,
with an election.
the Greens are out of time.
It's definitely
can I
not
then
answering
move
the
on
question.
to Assembly Member Whittle? You have 48 seconds to ask a quick question to get a quick answer.
I'm very, very pleased to hear about your efforts to reduce waste and rubbish in London. Can you add to it, please, that EU flag that's still flying outside? You've got 2 weeks to do it in. Come on. Get it down. Put it in the dustbin.
Chair, one man's waste is another man's very proud EU flag.
Thank you.
Oh, no,
okay.
Come on. No,
That's
you're Mayor for all Londoners. You're meant to be anyway.
That's the end of this question and answer session with you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for your answers. Okay, Assembly members, let me just now go into speed format. Part B of the agenda. Can I ask the Assembly to agree the motion set out on the agenda in my name, which is that the Assembly notes the answer to the questions asked? Agreed? Yes. Item 6, can I ask the Assembly to note the decisions of the Fire Resilience and Emergency Planning FREP Committee further to its meeting held on 17th December 2019 as set out on at Appendix 2 to recommend that the Mayor should proceed with his proposed appointment of Andy Rowe to the office of the London Fire Commissioner. Noted, thank you. Item 7. The next meeting of the London Assembly will be the plenary meeting, which will take place at 10 a.m. on Wednesday, 29th January, in this chamber. And this meeting will principally be used to put questions to the Mayor on the draft consolidation budget for the GLA group. But of course, members will know we'll be meeting before that at People's Question Time. In Haringey, hosted by Assembly Member McCartney. Item 8, any other business the Chair considers urgent. I have agreed to accept 2 urgent items of business at this meeting in accordance with Section 100B4 of the Local Government Act 1972, as amended and as detailed in the supplementary agenda, which you've all received. Item 8A concerns the changes to committee membership following the resignation of Gareth Bacon MP. AM from those committees. Notification was received after the publication of the agenda, and the Assembly is required to consider these changes at its next meeting. Can I ask the Assembly agree the recommendations? Agreed, thank you. Item 8B concerns the appointment of the Executive Director of Resources, which incorporates the role of Chief Finance Officer. Interviews took place after publication of the agenda, and the appointment must be confirmed at the earliest opportunity, which is today. Members will see that at Appendix 3, the terms and conditions for the appointment have been provided to members only and have been reserved from publications for the reasons set out in the paper. Can I see indication from members that they do not wish to discuss item 12C in public at this meeting? Agreed, thank you. Can I then ask the Assembly to note that it is a joint decision with the Mayor to approve and appoint Mr. David Galley as the Greater London Authority's Executive Director of Resources, incorporating the statutory role of the Chief Finance Officer with effect from 1st April 20 and on the terms and conditions as set out in contract at Appendix 3. Members will know that Mr. Galley has served this authority well in his current post, and I'm sure you'll join me in wishing him all the best in this new role that he'll start from 1st April. Can I ask the Assembly to confirm that pursuant to Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, the information set out at Agenda Item 12C should be excluded from publication on the grounds that it involves likely disclosure of exempt information as defined by paragraph 1 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972, and it is considered that in all the circumstances of the case, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing this personal information, and also to note the information set out. Can I hear confirmation?
Yep.
Thank you. And then, lastly, to remind members that there is a briefing for you on the excellent work of therapy dogs that will start at 1 o'clock in Committee Room 2. Thank you for your attendance. It's been a very interesting meeting. Bye. Gavel, gavel. Gavel, gavel.